Robert had been surrounded by female attention since kindergarten. The girls tried to be paired with him at matinees, brought him candy and cookies from home, insisted that at quiet time their crib was next to each other. They demanded at home that they bought the most beautiful hairpins for their hair or weave into the braid a brighter colored ribbon. This frenzy never ceased. At school, this state of affairs only worsened. Not by years, a tall boy with dark hair and blue eyes broke the hearts of not only classmates, but also teachers from the fairer sex. They did not raise their hands to reprimand him or lower his grade when his answers were not up to the highest grade. Although his appearance did not resemble the appearance of an angel, he did not look like a demon at all. He was like a stately, humble Greek god with a piercing gaze and an enchanting smile. He didn't speak, but he spoke the words that obediently formed into correct sentences without stuttering. He studied easily, took prizes at Olympiads in all subjects, gallantly asked girls to dance at festive parties, moved amazingly during incendiary discos, turning any music into his obedient servant. Robert and Elizabeth were inseparable almost from the very beginning of their acquaintance. It was useless to drive a wedge between them. The girl moved to this city with the family of her military father. She was laconic in everything: clothes, hairstyle, school bag, pens, and notebooks. When the class wanted to make fun of it, Robert was right there. Somehow it happened that he took under his protection a little girl who stood last in the long row in gym class. The girl with gray eyes, two pigtails, tied with black rubber bands, for some reason caused in him a pinch of pity. A lump in his throat stuck. But this little girl was not a bad girl. She pulled the girls back, asking what kind of dense material she was made of. We lived in the north for a long time. In the schools there, they were heated in winter, but we still had to insulate additionally. Do you want to talk about it? The curious people backed off at once. What's the point of getting involved with someone like that? It's not worth it. She's too quick with her tongue. Robert grinned to himself and invited Elizabeth to sit at the same desk with him. It's free. I usually sit alone. You'll be comfortable. You can see the blackboard. It's the penultimate desk in this row by the window. In his soul, he had not yet settled in Elizabeth's address romantic notes, but he always wanted to take care of her like some young, helpless puppy. At home, he had a beagle given to him just at that time for his birthday. He had dreamed of a sheepdog, but their apartment would not support such a large dog. Here in their family, an appeared mischievous, cute beagle, a faithful friend, selflessly loving later their masters and completely unpretentious in care, the sweetest companion with soft ears and a long tail. Robert was unusually patient with his parents, cuddling and nurturing him all the time. Suddenly he realized that Elizabeth was more than just a friend, companion, and sister in spirit to him. When she badly shattered her knees one winter when she fell on the ice, they were already in 8th grade at the time. From a small, graceful statue, Elizabeth began to turn into a petite young lady with the crushes inherent in her young age. The girl was incredibly stubborn. She dragged him home after school across a smooth, vacant lot prepared for digging foundations for a new building. Don't go, Robert, it'll be 5 minutes before we're home. It's too long and uninteresting to walk around that fence. Especially in this weather, she urged. He'd fallen for her pleas. Now she was sitting on the cold ground with her tights torn to shreds and deep lacerations on her knees, stumbled over pieces of rebar left behind by who knows who. He didn't hesitate long, picked her up in his arms and carried her to his house where no one was present. In the apartment, he treated the wounds, which after he had washed away all the blood with peroxide, did not seem so horrible anymore. They were 14 years old. Hormones were certainly starting to rage in their bodies by now, but they weren't what made him kiss her lap near the wounds. Tenderness nudged him gently. She wasn't frightened. She leaned over, hugged his head, and nuzzled the top of his head. Robert, are you scared? It's okay. You've got tea in the house or something to go with it, haven't you? I'm starving. I'll never make it home, she laughed. From that day on, they kissed each other on the cheek when they met. They walked mostly hugging now, but without any hint of closer proximity. Peer girls were ready to wipe Robert in powder for the fact that Robert did not notice anyone around, but they did not dare to do any harm. Only sometimes they let out barbs. But the young couple could do nothing. Even stain their friendship could not, so pure and light it was. In the graduating class, everything suddenly changed. Both grew up and could no longer ignore the natural laws of nature. Robert realized that this was his first love. She was not a whim or a temporary eclipse brought on by young age. This girl had firmly established herself in his heart. It happens that even handsome men belong to the clan of those who meet their only woman once and are faithful to love her afterward for a lifetime. Let someone try to argue that this is a fairy tale. After school, both entered the university, he at the Faculty of Physics and she at the Faculty of Economics. In the educational institution on Robert again began the hunt. Having gone through the crucible of naive passions at school, Elizabeth and Robert did not even cast a glance at his admirers, and they, like snakes, hissed back. Where's he ever been? He's at least in Hollywood, starring in a movie instead of Richard Gere. They can't be together. It's absurd. In one of the lectures in my freshman year, I was amused by a scene. The subject was common history. Different departments listened to it together, without division into physicists, chemists, geographers, and economists. Among the female students, as usual, was its star, its first beauty, its prima donna. She had bet with her fellow students that she would steal Robert away from Elizabeth in no time. She was counting on her striking looks. Men on the streets would crane their necks when they saw her in the crowd. She didn't mince words with the guy, she just sat down on his lap without even giving him a second thought. In front of the student crowd, not at all embarrassed. Robert didn't bother to embarrass the arrogant person. With an expression as if he had touched a nasty toad, he took her by the shoulder with 2 fingers and pulled her off his lap. Don't ever do that again. My heart is occupied. It's about time you all realize that. Belle was taken aback. Are you talking about that roof that's always dangling beneath your feet? Don't make us all laugh. What could you possibly have in common with her? Robert's blue eyes filled with an angry glint. Thank you, my girlfriend can't hear you right now. But the rest of us should know that behind your beautiful shell hides an evil heart that knows no true feelings. You're nothing. I don't envy anyone who would give their soul to you. You'd trample it for nothing. After these words, the curious crowd parted and Elizabeth came up. Robert calmly put his arm around her shoulders and said, "Come, let us sit in the other row. There's a foul smell of meanness here. I hate that insidious odor." Elizabeth did not understand anything, but she did not argue with him, as was her custom. Her man was young, that was a fact, but always very sensible. If he said so, there was some truth in it, however strange. He had also announced to her parents 6 months ago, in the same cavalier manner. Elizabeth and I love each other, and that's forever. We'll quarrel a little at university, and then we'll get married. Our decision is not subject to appeal, so all arguments are canceled in advance. Both families lived modestly. Parents couldn't afford a separate place for their children. Therefore, at a general family meeting before the modest wedding, it was decided that Robert and Elizabeth would marry after the 3rd year of study, when the university begins training in a narrow professional profile. So they did. Further in their life, everything was very similar to the life of other families. They did not grab stars from the sky in material terms. At the end of their 5th year, Joan's firstborn was born. 3 years later, Catherine. Just like to write a classic saga, married, have produced 2 children, dreaming of a 3rd child. The search for women around Robert persistently continued. Even the boss of his mother's colleague laid her eyes on him in his office hung his portrait. He invited the door on the key immediately locked in his fashion attire. Shows of new collections of local tailoring sometimes happened. The place specialized in men's clothing. The walking mannequin was a left-handed kid. The catch was that the audience immediately recognized his unconventional orientation. The audience started laughing. And then Robert caught the eye of the businesswoman. We don't want such a nature to go to waste. And we don't want such a nature to go to waste. Young man only dress up, and the butterflies will no longer choose suits for clients, and this miracle to admire. Catch a Guy decided to catch a high fee, which intended to also include services of a personal nature for herself and defile on the runway for business. When I told Robert the salary, he couldn't believe his ears. What kind of accomplishments? You offer me a salary 5 times more than my mother, a seamstress with vast experience. The woman once again assessed him from head to toe. You seem like a big boy, bigger than some. I don't need to explain it to you. If you are obedient, I will buy you an apartment, a car, fancy rags, accessories. I will take you to restaurants and hotels. I will teach you to have an elite vacation at the seaside. You'll travel with me a couple times a year. Isn't that a tempting prospect? I think you misunderstood me. Robert removed her hand. I'm not the one to make that kind of offer. Find yourself another easygoing boy, and don't let my refusal to get back at my mother make you regret it. The incident was over. The lady didn't bother him anymore. After her, there was a smashing master of men's haircuts. She kept trying to press up against him during the process of fighting with his unruly hair. He was so accustomed for his short life to such outbursts from the female sex that he never paid any attention to them. Nor were the pretenders to his heart offended. He was too good-looking. It's a sin to be angry with such a man. Robert, even in the university, disappointed in applied physics. It wasn't the way he'd envisioned it at school. All the 4th and 5th year in the evenings he went, as if on the 2nd shift, to the liquor factory to work part-time. They just loaded the finished product for shipment to the regions, and they lived in a rented apartment. There was a new monetary unit, 1 gun, or 1/2 liter for stronger drinks. Jokes are jokes, but Jennifer and Robert themselves were indifferent to alcohol. But they used it actively as gifts to a plumber for replacing a faucet, to an electrician for repairing the wiring. Robert was constantly missing at work. During the day he worked as a design engineer at a machine building plant, and in the evenings a loader. Jennifer sat with the children, smoothly transitioning from one maternity leave to another. She had not yet applied her talents in economics. They lived amicably. Robert got along with his wife's parents, Jennifer with his parents. The usual family unit. That seemed to be the end of their story. But would fate let them go without a trial? They were waiting for a loving couple. And what a couple. The attack of severe pain in his back caught Robert in the evening. It was a cold winter at home. He was still working at the liquor factory. Times were tough. Although Jennifer had put her eldest son in kindergarten, the younger Catherine constantly demanded attention and was often unreasonably cranky. It was impossible to go outside with her in cold weather. Pulling pain with periodic sharp jabs in the area of the spine forced the man to go to the doctors. There he first heard a new word that became a diagnosis: hernia. As he understood from the doctor's words, it was about problems with the spine and discs. The doctors assured him that if he took care and did not lift heavy weights, everything would be fine with constant monitoring. He would live happily ever after. So Robert had to say goodbye to loading and unloading for now, a source of money. The financial situation of the family is somewhat shaken, and Catherine has not outgrown childhood colds, constantly either sniffling or coughing. District pediatricians strongly advised to take the girl in the summer to the sea, preferably for a couple of months. Otherwise, she would also be sick at school. Elizabeth, of course, found it impossible to go to the sea with only one daughter. It was out of the question financially to have a vacation with the 4 of them. The solution was to choose the lesser of 2 evils. Go to the sea with the 3 of us and the children. Robert somehow in 2 months will get out to them at least for a weekend. That's how the 3 of them went to the more or less democratic Anapa. Robert stayed home to do chores. Since some time, a new tenant had settled in their house, a woman in her 40s, the owner of several clothing stores in the city. She moved into an apartment in a remote neighborhood, she said, so that the eyes of her husband, after a high-profile divorce, did not see her. The clever husband tried to sue half of the business from her, and the case with boutiques she created and developed herself. As she liked to quote the hero of the movie, Ivan Vasilievich changes profession by hard labor. Andrei and the yard-bright lady immediately noticed. And he seemed to her so flawless that she immediately wanted to participate in his fate. She invited him to work for her. Engineer, physicist, and fashionable business, 2 parallel planes. But surprisingly, he did well. His machine-building plant was living its last days. The technological lines were obsolete. No one, not even the most talented designer, could come up with anything ingenious to get this enterprise back on its feet. And the neighbor needed an assistant with decent looks, who could charm the partners with charisma and impeccable manners. Robert was perfect for this role. As for his wife, she just needed a deputy with an ideal reputation as a model family man. Her chain of stores was called Family. It stood for 7 friendly eyes. They sold clothes for men and women, as well as for children. Michael was very skeptical of her suggestion. He laughed. Where am I with my technical education? And where are the clothes, new collections, all this glitter and tinsel of rags and accessories? Jacqueline, on the other hand, was not so adamant. Michael, do you underestimate yourself? Each of us should be willing to sell what we have in abundance. In your case, it's God-given beauty, so why not turn it into a popular commodity for the sake of your well-being? Let's just give it a try. A month's work with me won't cost you anything. He walked home and thought wistfully, nothing will come of this collaboration. She will again start looking for ways to get closer to me. And for me, such an option is impossible. The man was wrong. Jacqueline was a much wiser and more astute woman. She already had a young and strong companion for her health, but he was not smart enough to be seen with him in public, and her firm needed a male face. She used herself as a female face. What was missing was an idyllic image, an assistant with an impeccable reputation. Michael agreed to the experiment. Especially at the factory, everyone was on leave without pay for an indefinite period of time. Time was passing. Soon his family would return from the sea, and the house was empty. He couldn't make any money while his loved ones were improving their health on the coast. Jacqueline taught him the science of being, not appearing to negotiate patiently, to watch his speech, to dress tastefully even for a little money, to be able to maintain a conversation on any topic. She persistently dragged him along to all business meetings and brought him into her circle. After a couple of weeks, Michael calmed down. Jacqueline did not make any attempts. She diligently molded him into an enterprising business partner who is not lost in any commercial situation, will calculate ahead of all the moves, will increase the accumulated, save previously achieved. When Elizabeth returned home, she did not recognize Robert. At the train station, they were met by a respectable man in a strict, elegant suit, matching shirt, stylish tie. From surprise, she could not restrain irony. Where did such a handsome uncle come from? Then she rushed towards him and hung on her lover's neck. No, you told me, of course, that you changed your job. But I could not imagine that the change in you would be so radical. At home, in a clean apartment, Elizabeth and the children were waiting for a set table, new toys, items of clothing, bought by the head of the family as a gift. It would be a happy life. But insidious envy is always around. In a barrel of honey finds a spoonful of tar. The range of Robert's duties included not only labor everyday life, but also accompanying the owner of the stores Jacqueline to corporate events held in her company and at the enterprises of colleagues in the trade. For some time now, Jacqueline had been obsessed with the idea of expanding the chain with 2 new department stores. She suddenly wanted families to be able to shop in her facility entirely without leaving the buildings and retail space. She was already negotiating for furniture. But even that didn't seem enough for her. In her dreams, she saw people coming into her realm for the day. In addition to non-food items, peeking into retail outlets with a large assortment of high-end products from farmers and private owners. Then it's off to a cafe, a pastry shop to celebrate successful purchases with drinks and sweets. She even found such a chef that she believed in success in advance. His handmade cakes and pastries were amazing. Even adherents of eternal diets could not resist and sat down at the table with everyone. The business promised to be very profitable and promising. Only one obstacle hindered these endeavors. An official from the city administration did not want to put her signature on the authorization documents for operation. She was an impenetrable old-school aunt, with no visible weaknesses. Jacqueline went all out, pulling in all her connections. But the case was stalled. Robert's boss was quite desperate, but then she learned a thing that made her hair stand on end. It turns out that the Iron Lady secretly liked to play, went to neighboring cities to indulge her passion for gambling away from the prying eyes of fellow countrymen. Moreover, she was very fortunate in this vice of hers. The owners of gambling houses were afraid of her appearance. Luck did not leave her for long, constantly increasing her secret capital. But no one tried to prevent her. After all, Madame was from the highest echelon of power at the local level and could close gambling establishments with a single movement of the hand. Having learned such sensational news, Jacqueline immediately decided to give Robert a delicate assignment. She will hire a private detective to find out what kind of places this lady likes to visit. Robert will casually get acquainted with her and try to get dirt in the form of photos and videos of her game. Yes, it wasn't the most ethical way to get the lady to back off. Jacqueline didn't like it herself. But what else was there to do? In the fight against the enemy, All means are good, even such a sneak attack. The preparations for the operation went smoothly. For a good fee, the secretary of the administrative lady leaked the information that she had taken a few days of vacation at work at her own expense. All indications were that she was going on a trip to one of the cities where she could indulge in gambling. After tracing where the train tickets had been bought, Robert was sent on a business trip. He only joked. "You've made a commercial spy out of me? You've got addresses, passwords, where to go and who to introduce myself as. The only thing left to do is to glue on a mustache and a beard for conspiracy. And then we can go on the job." One thing he didn't tell anyone. Robert took home all his savings, saved for a rainy day, to try his luck next to his lucky aunt. Moreover, he borrowed a large sum from the head of security at Jacqueline's office. It never occurred to anyone that he was playing with his luck, and he'd had a large drink of whiskey at the bar beforehand. Robert sat at the table next to the lady from the administration and was terribly angry. She bet on one number or the other, chose black or red color, and almost always won at least a small amount of money. He, on the other hand, lost every last dime. All the promises of beginner's luck turned out to be nothing, and he was never lucky. The waiter kept bringing him whiskey on the rocks. His head was getting heavier and heavier. He had forgotten all about his mission. At some point, his patience broke. He rose abruptly from the table, pushing away the waiter who was just about to pour him another drink. With a hard look at his lucky neighbor, he shouted, "Fuck you and your administrative capabilities. I'm here almost in my underpants camera carried to film you at the game, and you do not give a damn. It's all ha 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 until you've had enough." It was a scandal. Security instantly searched it and found hidden cameras and recorders. The official threw the money and instantly disappeared from the hall, not forgetting to grab the winnings. Jacqueline could not forgive Robert for the failure of the operation. That powerful lady couldn't. With some inner instinct, she realized who was so interested in collecting dirt on her. Jacqueline's dream of creating a nice shopping and entertainment centers crumbled into small shards. Now, when she met Robert in the yard, she didn't even say hello, deliberately averting her face. Robert came home like a beaten dog. The family piggy bank was empty. A servant from Jacqueline's entourage hinted to him that he would not wait long for the loan to be repaid. He would soon put him on the meter and follow him everywhere. At the machine factory, where Robert had a small position, they were not going to start the lines. Thoughts swirled in his head that his ex-wife was wrong. Where to sell beauty if no one in this world wants it? Only at the distillery did he have all the peace and serenity. Maybe he is weak, worthless head of the family, not capable of anything in this life. By all accounts, it appeared that his only dignity, loyalty, and devotion to his beloved woman. But he had nothing to feed her and the children. His feet carried him to the glass rows of vodka and liquor bottles. Where he had worked before, he could be useful. Why, his back was aching by evening, and he would bear it. His wife needn't know how he earned every penny. Soon tales are told and deeds are done. Usually within 2 years of working at the liquor factory, the family's financial situation has improved. Son Joan and daughter Catherine already went to school. Elizabeth found a job as a cashier in a small company. The salary was meager, but she could pick up her children after school, take them to classes, feed them at home properly, and check their lessons without rushing. The globe was spinning on its axis. The years went by slowly. The next bright burst in the career of 30-year-old Robert happened as if by magic. Apparently, the heavens took pity on his monotonous, like Groundhog Day, life. By that time, he had not bothered to find a more decent job. He remained infantile and uninitiative in this respect. He had little faith that there would be any change in his professional destiny. Elizabeth was tired of convincing him that Jacqueline's education and his looks could have been a good match for him. But he had been dealing with money debts for so long that he had always avoided any career opportunities, as if they were the hot milk of failure, potentially shaking his temporary well-being. Further events unfolded as follows. Robert's home liquor company began bottling a new line of elite liqueurs. In such cases, one cannot do without advertising, which the management did. In one of the pleasant spring days, the factory yard was filled with unusual noise. A commotion began. A crowd of curious people gathered. It's not every day that a real movie is shot in front of your eyes, a whole series of reels. Rumor has it that even billboards will be prepared. See how the bosses have splurged, whispered in the crowd. The workers must have had high hopes for those chocolate and coffee liqueurs. They're too sweet for us, too sweet, too sweet. They say they're aristocratic drinks for the ladies. But for us it's all the same, as long as the advance payment and wages are paid on time. To the surprise of the audience, an ugly scene played out right in front of their eyes. Some actor of the local theater suddenly got into a pose and began to argue with the director and cameraman. Why didn't you tell me at once that you had to present ladies' goods? This you spoil my whole image of brutality, my reputation as a macho on stage and on the screen. Find him among the workers, someone with a face, and shoot him on your billboards. What kind of whimsy is that? Echoed him in the tone of a confused director. Where will I find a suitable texture here? They all have matchstick faces. Well, how with such a hot drink? It's a Klondike to work next to them. The workers looked at each other resentfully. The sight was no longer languid, and they immediately became offended. You insult us, my man. You insult us, my man. Our beauties have their own glamour. Your acting is no match for his. There he is. Robert was passing by on his way to the dining room for lunch. He never liked noisy spectacles, so he tried to stay away from the performance organized by advertising specialists at the factory. But curiosity, as always, won out. The director was a master of shooting commercials. They could use an extra, even a popular model with a fresh face. The reality exceeded all his expectations. Past the improvised set was such a handsome man of 35 years that the director in the first moments dumbfounded, then quickly pulled himself together and asked to follow him in sprint. It would be a big mistake to miss such material. A man? Yes, you, I'm talking to you. Could you slow down a bit? I can't keep up with you, he said. To what do I owe? Robert stared at him with his impossible blue eyes. I don't have such a long lunch break, and there are long lines in the cafeteria. The director looked him over once more from head to toe. Oh, what a good-looking man. His breed, his manners, his impeccable masculine figure, his correct facial features, seasoned with charisma. He was ready to pinch himself on the arm. Such Hollywood standards with snow-white teeth can't just walk around an old-fashioned distillery unperturbed. Yes, he doesn't seem to know the price of his appearance, thought the director, and said aloud, would you agree to help us out? Inner instinct of advertising business master for some reason immediately realized that to promise this man a golden mountain from the jump is not worth it. Here it is necessary to press on pity, to emphasize the failure of deadlines, on friendship and mutual assistance, to tell about the deadlocked situation with the actor suddenly refusing to shoot, as in the water looked. At first, Robert did not want to hear about any filming, heartily laughed in response to compliments of his beauty and relevance. I have already once tried to sell my appearance as a marketable commodity. Nothing good came out of it. Somehow I do not want to go again in such experiments. Do not chop from the shoulder, tried to press on the pity of the director. If we had not had unforeseen circumstances, I would not have persuaded you now. You'd be a great help to us if you'd agree to do at least a billboard movie. Robert shuddered when he heard the amount of the fee he was being offered. The director decided not to be stingy, not to save money on a debutante. The man thought that this amount could be enough for a small trip to the sea for the four of us. Soon summer vacations. The children could use such an opportunity. 2 weeks later, huge billboards were hung all over the city, on which Robert drank liquor with the lady of his heart. Her role in the photo was played by a young student of the theater school, pretty as a rosebud in her youthful charm. Both looked at each other with such love, holding shot glasses of chocolate liqueur, that there was no doubt. There it was, the cause of the romantic mood lurking at the bottom of the elegant vessels. Sales of the liquor increased dramatically. The director rubbed his hands and waited for the release of commercials. In them, the sweet couple also starred brilliantly. He was very pleased with the photo, talent, and unexpected ability of Robert not to look in the frame stiff. That's the kind of guy the camera loves. After the launch of the videos, Robert began to be recognized on the street, and the products of the factory began to be ordered to other regions. Women looked at the colorful picture and demanded that their men urgently try the magic drink. The fees of 2 random models increased many times over. In the office of the director, more and more often began to hear phone calls. Rising star, shown in a successful commercial, suddenly urgently needed in his colleagues. But he firmly kept the situation under control, took on the production of commercials advertising men's perfume, and then sportswear. Before Robert faced a dilemma to stay to work as a loader at his native distillery, or to listen to the advice of the new boss and go into the advertising business. The scale was outweighed by a vacation. This time they were able to go on vacation, all four of them. Elizabeth and the children were over the moon. Robert even stopped paying attention to more and more often arising in his back pain until he did not disrupt another shooting. He went to the hospital with a severe attack of intervertebral hernia. Life apart from him flowed in its own way. Good they were now, as they call it, with money, could afford to undergo a medical examination in a private clinic. The doctor's conclusion this time was not so rosy. His work as a loader had done its job as professional trauma had turned into a herniated disc. Robert had to spend a month in the clinic. Through the efforts of therapeutic exercise, drips and skillful actions of the medical staff, doctors brought him back into action. Before discharge, they admonished him forget forever about heavy physical exertion, even medium, sharp movements of the body. Otherwise, next time you will find yourself right on the operating table. The verdict was final, not subject to appeal. The director met his favorite with open arms. The man no longer worked for him on the bird's rights of the model, which occasionally invited to revitalize some video. Unexpectedly, Robert once proposed an innovative technical idea, then the next. Now he not only starred in his, at first seemingly fantastic developments based on the laws of applied physics, but also came up with more and more new solutions. After he was hospitalized, the company somehow drastically reduced its management, drew conclusions. It was time to offer their talented generator of ideas a solid place in the executive chair. In the active labors on the advertising field, Robert did not even notice how the whole 5 years flew by. Joan has already had time to finish school. There was another significant event from a clumsy teenager. Resembling an ugly duckling, he suddenly turned into a copy of his father. Only his eyes were gray, huge, like Elizabeth's. History repeated itself. The guy was adored by all the classmates and girls from other schools, except that he didn't have his dad's stamina for attention from the female sex. He changed girlfriends like gloves, broke hearts carelessly, in passing, often forgetting the names and appearance of casual companions for one night. Robert and Elizabeth only had their heads in their hands. Joan heeded none of their exhortations. Preds. What do you know, honestly? I don't care how many girls I've had and how many more I'll have. They hang on me in bunches. Why should I deny myself the pleasure? I'm not going to go to school like you. I've already chosen the advertising department, which trains PR managers. I'll approach my dad's current business with more modern technology. But if I'm also invited to do a movie, it'll only be better. Fame will find its hero, or heroes. Joan wasn't your typical narcissist. At first he was shocked that so many members of the fair sex follow him in droves. He laughed I should take another shower. Is it in the maternity hospital? Or is it smeared for them? He was bombarded in social networks with offers, and in real-life notes and invitations to parties and picnics, youth parties and nightclubs, or to his home. Times have changed, he told his parents. You're like mammoths. Your views on fidelity, no cheating, are outdated. Robert and Elizabeth did not push him too much, did not bring him up, did not hurry him to settle down, to meet his one and only woman. Let him go out for the time being. It's a young thing, they decided. They were now much more concerned about an unexpected problem that loomed on the horizon. Their daughter Catherine had just turned 15. It was time to think about her future profession. The girl's mind was filled with illusions and fantasies. She decided to become an actress and went to the theater club for the second year. Last week, a friend of the teacher, who works as a choirmaster, unexpectedly came to the class. She was interested in Catherine, who was performing a simple song from the play at the rehearsal. The woman was impressed by her voice and took her parents' contacts. Later, she found Robert and Elizabeth, met with them, and was shocked by the news. Your girl has an extraordinary, rare vocal gift. I listened to her in detail after that chance meeting. It would be a crime if you didn't give her music and vocal training. Who knows? Maybe we're looking at a future great opera singer. Robert and Elizabeth stared at her. Yes, the choral specialist nodded. You heard right. Your daughter has a unique voice which now looks like a rough diamond that will become a magnificent diamond. But Catherine is already 15 years old, Elizabeth said thoughtfully. Isn't it too late for her to learn music and singing? The choirmaster smiled slyly. It's never too late to become a singer or to learn anything at all. It's strange that you didn't notice that your daughter has such a beautiful voice. Yes, singing never really stood out in front of them. Robert tried to explain his ignorance. Only at matinees in kindergarten, and later her singing I will not remember. The girl saw her vocation in another, remembered herself in the theater, in the cinema as an actress, hastened to dispel his doubts. Woman. And the decision, of course, you. But if I were you, I would buy a piano without delay and devote all her free time to vocal lessons. I'll find the necessary specialists for such a gifted child. I look forward to your call. The piano for Catherine was bought the following week. It's expensive and very beautiful. It's beautiful to look at and play on. Robert personally supervised the loading and unloading of the instrument. He was afraid that the movers would do something wrong. On the platform of the third floor, it seemed to the man that the workers were about to drop their purchase. What's holding this enormous thing on its sides? It's awkward, unstable, he thought. Robert lunged forward, picked up the piano from the side so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands, and immediately slid to the floor. His eyes went black with pain, and he could hardly move. The movers frighteningly surrounded the client. One of them rushed to the 5th floor to call Elizabeth. The ambulance arrived quickly. At the hospital, the doctors only shook their heads. Too rapid turn of the body, trying to pick up a heavy instrument, did their job. Robert's condition could only be improved by surgery, for which the man immediately began to prepare. It was entrusted to a young, ambitious surgeon, Madison. Already in an hour, she came to get acquainted with her new patient and froze. He was so handsome. Madison, as is often the case in academic and career circles, had shown great promise since medical school. Her father was a brilliant surgeon, and her mother was an equally savvy operating gynecologist. The girl was already accustomed from childhood in the house to constant medical conversations and discussions. Other future as to join the family dynasty, for herself did not see. Personal life, and a rather pretty young woman, did not add up. Robert and Madison were a college couple who had married hastily, but soon divorced after a few carefree relationships. By the age of 30, Madison was left with a bad experience and a burning desire to make things right. She fell in love with Robert at first sight. He scheduled the surgery in 5 days. Madison went to work on her residency in confusion. She had a picture in front of her eyes, snow-white bedding, dark hair with barely visible sagebrush on the pillow, and startling blue eyes filled with pain. She'll make this man smile and forget his ailment. Or is she not a first-rate surgeon? And then there's his wife, Jacqueline, who's always getting underfoot. A gray mouse with big gray eyes. What could they possibly have in common? After all, they'd been living together for quite a while. The grown children came to visit their father. Madison grinned wryly. Can't push the wife away. I'm on night duty tomorrow. I'll take the bull by the horns as soon as my patient starts thinking and feeling better after the anesthetic. That day and the next seemed endless to her. She ran to Robert under any pretext, touched his forehead with a cool palm, listened to his lungs for some reason. The patient was indifferent to all her manipulations, reviving only when his wife appeared in the room. Nothing, my darling, Madison thought. You don't know yet what a surprise I've prepared for myself. By evening the next day, the surgical ward was nearly empty by evening. Elizabeth was going home too. There were some things to be done there. Robert's surgery was coming up soon. After it, she would be with him 24 hours a day for the first time. The children's meals have to be cooked, the house cleaned, the laundry done. Robert is feeling a little better so far. Now all that's left is to get through the surgery. Madison waited until Robert was alone. When all was quiet, she went to his room, where he was alone. The man was dozing uneasily. She snuck under the covers to the patient. The man flinched in surprise and stared at her with uncomprehending eyes. What's going on here? How did you get here? What do you want? Robert asked excitedly. Relax, Robert, his doctor whispered in his ear in a different voice. I like you a lot. Too much. But Robert felt only rejection, squeamishness, disgust. Are you crazy, Madison? I didn't give you any preferential treatment. I didn't hint. I didn't seek your favor. I love and respect my wife Jacqueline too much to even have such thoughts. Such an invasion of his personal territory was beyond his moral comprehension, so he pressed the button to call the nursing staff. Soon a nurse appeared in the room, her eyes rounded at the scene she had uncovered. Madison was huddled like a snake in the restroom. The man was still looking around fearfully. After calming him down, the nurse snidely asked the doctor on duty, "Madison, do you need my help or can I go?" There was no response. The woman in the restroom remained silent. A little while later, she quietly walked out of there. Turning around, she gritted her teeth. "You'll remember this concert. No one has ever humiliated me like that." Passing by the post, the duty nurse could not help but notice the ironic smile of her colleague. Tomorrow the whole department would know about the night incident. Madison had no doubt about that. So she kept a low profile for the remaining days before the surgery. She kept thinking of one idea. Robert did not say a word, did not show anything that could arouse suspicion in his wife about the night incident. He didn't want to upset her with such trivialities. He was polite but cold to Madison. The day of the surgery was finally set for tomorrow. The meeting with the doctor had already taken place. Only Elizabeth was a little nervous. After all, she hadn't sung for a long time, and tomorrow she had scheduled an extremely important meeting with 2 vocal teachers at once. Robert only laughed at Elizabeth's fears. "The surgery is elective, not the most complicated, while I'm under anesthesia on the table. You'll have just enough time to meet with everyone and talk things over," Robert said. "It's about the future of our daughter, Catherine. You have to be with me, and I'll be transferred to the intensive care unit first. You will come closer to the evening, when you have solved all the questions about the training of our young talent." That was the deal. Surgery to remove a herniated disc in the lumbar spine was not something unusual for Madison, so all her movements were honed to automaticity. She was a surgical professional who knew exactly what she could and could not do. Glimpse once again admiring the beautiful face of the patient, she gave the command to the assistants to serve something, bring something, and herself touched the nerve endings at the site of the operation so that no one noticed. In the protocol of manipulation of this nuance, Madison did not enter. After congratulating her colleagues on the end of the operation, she told the orderlies to bring Robert into the intensive care unit to observe the exit from anesthesia. A reaction to her experiment was to follow later. That was okay. She would wait. She was patient. At 3 a.m., she got a call from the ICU. "Madison, your patient is awake, but he can't feel his legs. Madison, come to us right away. We don't understand why there's such a serious complication." Stupid, the woman grinned to herself. "I paralyzed him on the operating table forever. But you will never know why he is paralyzed. That secret will go to the grave with me. Because a woman cannot be cornered by unthinkable humiliation. No one dares to reject me. Not even such a handsome man." Madison searched her soul diligently and found not a shred of pity for her patient. What's more, she only now remembered how she knew the man so well. He was the guy who'd graced billboards around town when her mom was into chocolate liquor. And her victim turns out to be a screen star. So much the worse for him. Now his business will be over. How weird is that? Didn't she take the Hippocratic Oath, which includes do no harm? Madison immediately answered herself. "I took an oath as a future doctor, and his nerve endings were touched by an offended woman. Now, your inviolable marriage, Mr. Plotnitsky, will you touch? I'll see how long it will take you both to portray the eternal, faithful to each other Tristan and Isolde." Meanwhile, Elizabeth was rushing to the hospital to Robert with good news. She had managed to arrange for piano and vocal lessons with both teachers. Already tomorrow, Catherine would begin to make up for lost time, to prepare for admission to the music school. Her daughter was pleased. Joan was a parasite, he kept laughing. What a parasite. But it's going to happen. We now have our own Maria Callas or Montserrat Cabal in the family, he said, laughing. Then the 3 of them laughed contagiously, drank tea with scones and cherry jam, discussed that soon Robert would return, and life would go on as usual. Then the children went about their business, and Elizabeth hurried to Robert's house, remembering to bring some goodies for him. At the clinic, putting on a robe, The woman already approached her husband's room, where he was transferred from the intensive care unit. But then she heard the nurses whispering, "Lord, why should such a beautiful man be punished by God? I cleaned his floors, and he lies like a statue. Recently he was taken down from the intensive care unit. He can't feel half of his torso from below. What a grief for the family." Elizabeth's legs gave out and she flopped down on the couch. It can't be. What are they saying about Robert? That there are no other handsome men in the hospital. He's the only one having surgery today. Her head rumbled, soothing thoughts. But the heart couldn't lie. It knew the truth, and it bled like a wounded animal. Something had gone wrong for her husband Robert today. Fate had handed down a sentence that could not be reversed. Robert's condition had not changed a bit in a day, a month, or a year. During that time, he and Elizabeth had gone through several stages of acceptance. First, the man was in sullen despair, then in prostration, then in anger at the circumstances. He shouted at Elizabeth, "You must leave me. It is not proper for a woman of 40 to sleep in a cold bed. You realize I'm not a man anymore." Elizabeth reacted to his outbursts in different ways. She cried or, on the contrary, laughed, said that this is nothing, that this is not the main thing in the relationship between a man and a woman. She found new arguments for her husband. Robert, for a while, seemed to calm down. But inside he still did not agree with her, as it seemed to him, unnecessary devotion. He thought that she was burying her feminine nature, took on an impossible burden. He would surely figure out a way to free her from that heavy cross. Madison got off lightly at work. There was a meeting to analyze the actions of everyone involved in that unfortunate operation. Independent experts reviewed the entire protocol of the surgical procedure in detail. They found no medical errors. The patient's complications were attributed to his personal physiologic peculiarities. Madison continued to work in the department, even without a reprimand or reprimands in her file, as if nothing had happened. Only the nurse on duty that night, when the surgeon unusually visited Robert's room, suddenly decided to change her job. She found a position as head nurse on Madison's father's ward. Such a happy coincidence. The girl was smart, and she wouldn't talk about what she'd seen. Only Madison hinted that it was strange how everything with the patient turned out, at the right time in the right place. She didn't have a problem with it. All the more reason for her to feel like she'd overstayed her welcome in the ranks. A nurse with her experience would like to find a bigger position. The two women, Elizabeth and Jacqueline, understand each other and agree. Not long after the heated scandals and Robert's attempts to talk Elizabeth into a divorce, their home became suspiciously quiet and calm. The man was increasingly digging with some blueprints, inventing something. At work in an advertising company, given his early merits, such trouble was left for him. The place of a freelance technical development consultant was formalized on a remote mode and faithfully paid a small allowance called salary. Elizabeth was still working in her small firm, but as an economist. The salary was low, and her savvy helped. Back when Robert was in favor, smiling at everyone from every other billboard in town, she saved some money, put it in the bank for a long time at a fairly high interest rate. There was enough for bread and butter, and even sometimes their favorite blackcurrant jam. With entertainment, Catherine had to temper her appetite a little. But the children loved their father so much that they took it for granted, so there were no serious material worries in the family. After a couple of months of hard work, Robert asked Elizabeth to invite his colleague Michael to dinner. He explained that he and Michael have long had a warm friendship, so he wants to ask him to help with the launch of a new invention in the shooting of commercials. We had a good time. We recalled funny incidents from the life of the native company. Michael lamented that the face of the advertising kingdom could disappear from the screen, and then Long asked Robert to take one and another pose. He gave his resume later. "My profession as a cameraman taught me to shoot people in a variety of angles. You've become even more photogenic, Robert. There's something in your eyes. So now we have to base our commercials on your close-ups. It'll be an even bigger success, I guarantee it." Michael was not the least bit mistaken. Advertising office furniture, in which Robert filmed in a huge office improvised boss, the public was accepted by the hurrah. Respectable and dressed with needle, a very handsome man with intelligent eyes created the image of an ideal boss who wants to obey unconditionally. And no one needed to know how to shoot immobilized Robert laying cushions in the high luxurious chair of a modern manager. After the first experience began to appear other orders. Former magnitude in them was not, but decent money for the family to earn quite well received. Robert, as before, came up with some interesting additions to the technical equipment of the situation in the frame. Everything together made their commercials in demand on the advertising market. Elizabeth breathed a little sigh of relief that her husband had abandoned his idea that they should get a divorce. At least he wasn't having any more unpleasant conversations on the subject. Robert was troubled by something else. After that dinner at their home, he noticed with what sympathy Michael is interested in his wife's affairs, secretly asking him how she is doing. Goes casually on the street when Elizabeth comes to pick up Robert from the shooting. A slightly wild plan was growing and solidifying in Robert's mind. He decided to let his wife go so she could live life to the fullest again. For the cause took zealously, and became even closer to the handsome cameraman, and began to often invite him to the house. On various far-fetched occasions encouraged his attention to his wife. A woman's heart is not a stone. Elizabeth, who had long been ignorant of other people's attention from cavaliers, was susceptible to Michael's behavior. He carried flowers, candy, and fruit to her every time, as if he were courting her. When was the last time she had a date in her life? Over 20 years ago, and now she was living in a cocoon of constant moral fatigue. No, she thought. I have not fallen out of love with my dear Robert. I have always been faithful to him. But sometimes one wants spring in one's soul so much. It is so hard to give up its blooming signs that promise joy. Robert at all these meetings between the three of them was as unperturbed as an iceberg. He pretended not to see that around him hovering love vibes from Michael, and Elizabeth is often embarrassed and does not know how to behave. Moreover, when the advertising company has a loud corporate party, he suddenly said he was sick, complaining of severe back pain. When Michael began to persuade Elizabeth not to miss such an interesting event, suddenly came to life, fussed, began to prove to his wife that she must have fun this evening. And then only supermarkets, pharmacies, nowhere to go. At the party, where for once Elizabeth dressed up in her best cocktail dresses, no one cared about her and Michael. People were enjoying champagne and stronger drinks, snacking from baskets, salad boxes, and desserts. Elizabeth and Michael did a lot of dancing. Elizabeth felt a little dizzy. How long had it been since she'd had a close relationship? A year? 2, 3? She had already lost count, trying never to think about it. After a soulful evening, they didn't take a cab. They decided to take a short walk along the promenade. Elizabeth soon got cold, so Michael threw his jacket over her shoulders and tried to hug her. She rejected his attempt. This conversation is not working, Michael thought. I love you, Elizabeth. Suddenly, Michael took a firm step toward her. I realize I shouldn't be having this conversation with you. You're married, and Robert is my companion. From the outside, my confession seems mean to someone who is not quite healthy, but I can't help it. I am drawn to you with such force that I am losing my head. Elizabeth was embarrassed by his confession, but answered him honestly. The worst part of it all is that I like you too. I wouldn't call it love, but you touch some strings in my feminine soul. Michael looked hopefully into her eyes. Shall I take your answer to mean that I have a chance to win your favor? Let's switch to you after all. I think we can leave all this superfluous ceremony behind already. Elizabeth answered slowly, as if considering something. We'll certainly transition to you easily. That's not the point, Elizabeth replied. You have to understand, Michael, Robert is my life, my only man, the father of my children, my soul and my heart. Right now, I may have the beginnings of a simple desire. I'm alive. But I'm not going to cheat on my husband. He and I are what they call for better or for worse let our heads sit on the same pillow, like Robert's. He's already gone gray since his surgery. I'm not arguing with that either. I'm just covering up the gray that's coming in so he won't see it. Think about it. Do you want a woman like me? Is it worth loving me and wasting precious time of your life? Michael was more serious than ever. All remnants of the champagne he'd drunk at the party were gone. I'll wait, Elizabeth, as long as it takes for you to realize how you really feel about me. I won't even remind you of that, but you should know that at any hour of the day or night. The doors of my bachelor pad are open to you. Let you not confuse that I am 7 years younger, that I have never been married, that having no experience in family life, I will learn everything quickly if next to me will be a woman like you." Then they were silent most of the time at home. Everyone was thinking about his own things. They didn't want to talk. Elizabeth didn't know what to do. Should she tell her husband that Michael had confessed his love to her, that he had promised to wait for her if she decided to leave Robert? She decided against it. She never said a word about that conversation. Michael decided otherwise. He decided to have a frank talk with Robert because he doesn't want to do anything behind his back. He considers it dishonest. He will ask his comrade to let his wife be happy and let her go to another man. That is, to him. Stalling for an explanation he would not. There was too much at stake for himself. He was not really an ardent bachelor, had on the male account of a womanizer dozens of short-lived novels. But his heart was silent. As a professional cameraman, he could spot beauty, distinguish artificial grimaces. He fell in love with Jennifer like an inexperienced boy. The imperfect figure of the not young girl excited him so much that after meeting Jennifer for a long time he could not calm the rapid pulse. She wasn't a fan of makeup. Her childishly naive gray eyes were without a single dab of mascara. He thought that was even better. He didn't see any flaws or imperfections in her, didn't notice what she was wearing today. All he cared about was her mood and her condition. Did she feel good? Was she not too tired? When they found themselves alone without her husband at the corporate ball, he felt like he was on a date with a woman for the first time in his life. Everything he'd had before her had been erased from his soul, from his memory. He was starting his life with a clean slate in matters of communication with the opposite sex. Only this way, not the other way around. The moment he pulled off his jacket and threw it over Jennifer's frozen back, he decided for himself that it was now or never, but he had to talk to her. He had an acquaintance who worked at the clinic where Robert had been operated on, so he knew the whole situation. His chosen one, his Jennifer, should be living life to the fullest. She's only a little over 40. It's a crime against her life. That's what fate had decreed. The conversation between Michael and Robert took place 3 days later. In the living room, two destinies, two contenders for happiness, in love and in love for many years, came together a cripple and a healthy, strong man, a man who had lost all hope and a man who was very much hoping for happiness. They did not shirk. They were honest with each other to the end. "I love her more than life," Michael asked. "Let her go, she can still be happy." "I offered her a divorce when I found out about my diagnosis and future prospects," Robert explained. "She wouldn't leave. Let her decide for herself." They parted not as enemies, not as friends. Before they did, they called Elizabeth and told her that they had had such a difficult but honest conversation. She suddenly took offense. "I'm not a thing. Why are you dividing me behind my back and without telling me?" Elizabeth said. Michael replied that it was Robert's will. He explained that he didn't want to cause her any unnecessary pain. It was so confusing, so frightening. The circumstances proposed for the three of them were not impossible. They could even be called quite civilized. But that didn't make it any easier for their trio. No one yet understood what the decision of a woman who was loved by two worthy men would be. For several days, everything in Robert's house was as if no sharp, momentous proposals had come from Michael. The man himself had gone quiet somewhere, never showing his face. Elizabeth fiddled with the daily chores and paid even more attention to caring for her husband, but was mostly suspiciously silent. Joan's downfall. Another stormy affair, and yet another piece of news rocked them. He was offered to star in a commercial, also to be the face of the company, but a youthful one. He was bursting with pride. "I am also handsome and will soon appear on the first billboards in the city," he said. His father, having listened to his enthusiastic story about his first successes, cooled his ardor a little. "Son, beauty has two sides. My mother and I still turn a blind eye to the endless round dance of your girls. But at some point you'll have to stop, settle down, choose the one you want to live with for the rest of your life." Joan retorted, "Dad, you're talking like you're in the last century. Love is one woman for life. Do you believe in these fairy tales? Even though you and Mom have been together for more than 20 years, you have an ironclad certainty that it will always be like that." Robert shivered. He didn't have that certainty right now. He didn't know. What if Elizabeth still wanted to try a different kind of happiness? These thoughts were slowly making him mad. And yet, he loved her so much that he was willing to let her go. A woman shouldn't have to give up on herself. The atmosphere in the apartment was a little annoying to Catherine. She spent the whole day right after school disappeared at music lessons, and then at home sang romances, which she now passed with the teacher at the top of her voice. Lines from a gorgeous piece were now being sung, touching the notes of romance in her soul. Elizabeth was washing dishes in the kitchen and thought wistfully, everything feels like it's pushing me toward Michael. Or maybe I'm looking everywhere for signs, pointers. I sometimes shuddered at the memory of that evening. I couldn't lie to myself. The dilemma how to move on. After a conversation between the two men who love her, circumstances, as always, pushed her to the denouement. The video with her husband in the lead role took first place in a contest of advertising products. To receive the award had to be not anywhere, but in Chicago. That's where the competition was held, regional companies. With this news, Michael again appeared in their house, enthusiastic, handsome, with hope in his burning eyes. Robert, Elizabeth, this is such a success, such heights. You and I must go to Chicago for this prestigious award. I will help as much as possible to make the trip comfortable, he said. Robert's mind immediately thought, here it is, the one that will make all the difference. Elizabeth must go to Chicago with Michael without me. I will let her go at any cost. Robert was a little miffed that he did not have to persuade his wife to go to Chicago. He immediately considered it a bad sign for him, a harbinger of the separation that would follow the trip. He was engaged in an inner dialogue with himself. What did you really want? That she would voluntarily enroll as a nun. You haven't touched her in 3 years. Robert moved defiantly into the living room to the large upholstered sofa. Elizabeth was packing her suitcase. No closet antics, no special outfits. Leaning toward restraint. This will be a business trip. I'll just act as my husband's official representative and go straight home, she thought. But then why had she put her prettiest lingerie at the bottom of the suitcase? She'd stuffed the bottle of perfume in her pocket, the one Michael had said at the party that smelled so good. Had she already made up her mind, and was she just fooling men? But after all, in her heart is still no answer to the question that concerns them both: who will she choose? In Chicago, in order not to waste time, Michael and Elizabeth arrived by airplane. The events were designed for 3 days. They would also have the opportunity to walk around the city. At the hotel, their rooms were on opposite sides of the hallway, but on the same floor. Elizabeth quickly changed into comfortable jeans, sneakers, and a long sleeve. Screw all the dresses and high-heeled shoes. I only brought them for tomorrow's ceremony. Charming Michael is not part of my plan, she thought. They had dinner right in the hotel restaurant. There was neither the energy nor the desire to look for something else. Before, Michael and Elizabeth had not felt constrained in each other's company, but now it was as if they had a bond of silence. They did not speak, but stuttered on every word. Do you like it? It's amazingly picturesque, Michael kept saying. His favorite place of power turned out to be a fenced area on the roof of a high-rise building with benches, tables, and even umbrellas from the sun, which were now rolled up. Tidy, cozy, unusual. On the walls, colorful drawings, graffiti. Now they were here alone amidst the city lights fading into twilight, and beneath them was all of Chicago in the palm of their hands. A mesmerizing sight. After drinking wine from a plastic cup, Elizabeth felt a sense of relaxation begin to blossom inside her for the first time. There was a beauty in the change of scenery, after all. Conversation was effortless now. Michael talked about his childhood, about his parents, who lived in a small town near Chicago. They loved their greenhouses, where they grew several unusual varieties of tomatoes. When fresh salad greens appeared on the table, there you could find fruits ranging in color from orange and yellow to black. Michael pulled Elizabeth to him, kissed her. She did not push him away as before, but responded to his kiss. They like you, Michael said. Who? Jennifer didn't understand. My parents, he explained. They're very simple, but they're also very warm-hearted people. They'll be easy for you to be with. She didn't say anything against it. She couldn't forget his kiss. And he realized it in his gut. They went to his room in the hotel. After that sleepless night of awarding a statuette for the best work of her husband, as a model of commercials Elizabeth remembered as in a fog. Then she and Michael had nothing to stop them from being together for 2 more days. The man thought triumphantly, Elizabeth is mine now. She will now leave Robert for good. There can be no doubt about that. He did not ask her anything about it. He was absolutely sure. They flew home in silence. It seemed to him that there was a complete understanding between them. From the airport they went to his house. Hastily in 4 hands prepared dinner. Again they locked in a long embrace. They fell asleep in the morning. When Michael awoke, Elizabeth was gone. On the nightstand next to his bed was a note. Michael, I'm sorry I'm a jerk because I only used you. I had to figure out, can I do it without Robert? The answer is no. You're a very good man. You're very gentle. But my heart tells me I don't love you and I never will. There's still only room for my husband. Thank you for everything. He didn't understand anything. He reread the text of the note, looked around once more. All of Elizabeth's things had disappeared from the bedroom. Would she go back to Robert again? Michael didn't kid himself. A woman like Elizabeth would indeed return to her husband, love him further, understanding everything, and endure the hardships associated with it. And the fact that she gave a temporary weakness, it is understandable. Elizabeth honestly told Michael that she was alive. He immediately added another epithet of his own, real. Michael immediately forgave her and, moreover, did not have any claims to her, did not think that she humiliated his male ego. Robert woke up reluctantly, out of inertia. He did not want to stay in this world. After all, Michael and Elizabeth were supposed to return home from New York yesterday. But Elizabeth never showed up. So she hadn't made her choice in his favor. Joan had gone to a sleepover at a friend's house last night, threatening to spend the whole weekend with her. And Catherine was getting some sleep after the recital. Robert sniffed his nose and thought, how strange. The apartment smells like my favorite cheesecakes with raisins and vanilla. Is Catherine up at the crack of dawn and working in the kitchen? The man quickly pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt, moved into his wheelchair, and drove to the smell of fried cottage cheese. In the kitchen, with his back to him, his Elizabeth was fiddling in a stretched homemade bright yellow t-shirt and black and white checked capri pants, his favorite. The boiling kettle whistled on the stove, so she didn't hear the sound of the stroller pulling into the kitchen. That's what a loving woman's heart is capable of. Like a barometer, it picks up any changes in the family atmosphere. Elizabeth instantly turned around and saw the happy blue eyes looking at her with mute adoration. She rushed to the man, knelt down, and embraced his motionless legs. Can you forget and forgive me all that has happened during these 3 days of my absence? Elizabeth asked. I could not resist. The native instinct of woman was stronger than my moral principles. But I have learned the most important thing: there can be no other man on this earth, and in the whole universe, but you, and let only death separate us, but very soon. Tears flowed from Robert's eyes. He wasn't going to resent her. He loved her too much and wanted her to be happy. Even if not with him, but what happiness it was. His woman had chosen him again out of a million men, just as she had done then, more than 20 years ago. Could any new misfortunes ruin their love now? Michael asked her quietly. So, together again. And now forever? Elizabeth answered. Yes, only like that, only together, my love. At that moment, the honored Catherine came into the kitchen. Like her father before, she too was attracted by the curious aroma. Mom, are you making your specialty cheesecakes? She exclaimed. I'm the first to taste. She reached for the ruddy curds on her plate, not even bothering to scoop Elizabeth's sour cream into her cup. By the way, my dear parents, why are you at the movies this morning? It's not like we haven't seen each other in 3 or 4 days. What a tragedy, said Catherine carelessly. Elizabeth thought to herself that a tragedy could have happened if she had made the wrong decision, and Robert could think of nothing at all. He had dissolved into his wife. How good life is, even in a wheelchair. You just have to realize it in time, appreciate it, feel it. Sometimes it's even possible to persevere through tough trials. He and Elizabeth did. bell rang at the most businesslike time, 10 a.m. At this hour, she still liked the movie Arrhythmia, the one about the emergency room doctor. But before that, she couldn't understand the main character's girlfriend. The girl returns when the house is buzzing with drunken company. She is invited to join them. She deflects with words say, "Not now, guys, I'm tired." She goes into the next room, closes the door behind her, turns on the music and falls asleep. How can she fall asleep in such a mess, and to a song? When Miranda became an EMT, she understood. Now she could pass out on the bus, or in a concert hall, or at home, even if the ceiling above her was on fire. Especially after a night like tonight. Of course, it's not an ambulance, but it's not much easier. There are times when the duty is more or less calm, but now the labor was a mess. In addition, the older one, with twins, also decided to give birth now. 2 weeks ahead of schedule, by the way. It's a good thing everything went without complications. We didn't have to call for help from surgery. But Miranda went home, as they say, down the wall. When she returned, her husband had already gone to work, leaving behind unwashed dishes and a hungry cat. Miranda caught herself using medical terms in her normal life, too. The gray puddle's pitiful and demanding cries had been controlled with the help of a couple of Purina packets. Then Miranda sat on the stool, unable to decide whether she wanted to eat or sleep. The last thing she wanted to do was move and get up. Finally, she cut off a thicker piece of sausage, drank the sandwich with milk straight from the bottle, and wandered to the bedroom, taking off her clothes as she went. What indescribable bliss it was to collapse into a clean, soft bed, to burrow into the pillows. Sometimes it seemed to Miranda that somewhere down there, deep down, if you climbed into it, there was a childhood left. You could dive into your own bed and come out in one where you were 10 years old and had so much strength that you could fly. But she wasn't flying now. The crow horse kicked her in the stomach with its hoof, but it didn't hurt, only frightened her. Probably if she had been dreaming a good and peaceful dream, the phone call would not have woken her up. But the black horse, multiplied by the mechanical trills coming from the corridor. 100 times Miranda wanted to give up the landline. She wished she and William only had cell phones that could be set to do not disturb. But the apartment belonged to her mother-in-law, and Peggy Urton's principle of life was let it be this applied to everything, from old buttons, which her mother-in-law carefully kept in a wooden box, and to the non-working television set, which had been moved to the pantry. What if it was still useful? The phone went silent, then rang again. Miranda got up as slowly as if she hadn't woken up on the move, but had been revived and was still part zombie. In the hallway, she leaned against a coat rack. Candy Adamson? A voice asked, sounding like it belonged to a very young girl. If the girl pretended to be a special investigator, she could hang up right away. But no, Miranda felt a vengeful feeling. She even wanted the girl to say, "Scammers are trying to make a loan in your name, and you have to help us." Then you can remember the turbulent years of youth, and tax the wench not even 7 stories, but that the size of a skyscraper. The resentment at fate for waking her up was so great that Miranda longed to let the wench's ear melt from her profanity. "It's the assistant notary," the girl said. "You need to come to our place on the Embarcadero to read the will. You have an inheritance. Will you accept it or refuse it? Can you come today? We're open till 6. No, Miranda didn't know why she'd said that. Let's do it tomorrow. Later, she couldn't explain to herself why she had decided to take this pause. And who? Who left me an inheritance? She asked. Can you tell me the name? And what inheritance are we talking about? It's a house. You've been bequeathed a house. Come and have it explained to you. Then the girl got distracted. Someone started to question her. She started to answer the person she was talking to, and a couple of moments later she hung up. Miranda was left at a complete loss. She went back to the bedroom and climbed into bed again. But sleep didn't come to her now. A house. She would have been surprised if someone had left her even a small amount of money. There was no such person. And suddenly a whole house. It would be possible if she had been a social worker, taking care of some lonely old woman. But who gives such gifts to midwives? Miranda tried to think, but something like a premonition stopped her. Don't, it was an inner voice, otherwise you might remember something very, very unpleasant. It was too late. Miranda put her palm to her mouth. She saw that face right in front of her again, those eyes, a rich emerald color like no living person's ever had. Not unless contact lenses. Again, that caressing, ingratiating voice whispered, "And I'll make you a present. You'll get it when the time comes. Then you won't turn away, you won't go away." Has the hour come? Perhaps her family was once an ordinary young family with a husband and wife who love each other and their little daughter. They are almost children themselves, and they sincerely consider her to be the eighth wonder of the world. Only Miranda didn't remember those wonderful times, even if she was dipping her memory deep into the place where all outlines are blurred and reality is so easy and simple to coexist with a fairy tale. For example, she once caught a star. The 5-beam neon blue star was lying in the palm of her hand and glowing. "It's bad for star on Earth," said Mom. "Let's let her go to the sky." And as soon as Miranda unclenched her fingers, the star, easily like an air bubble or a balloon, began to rise. Miranda still believed it had really happened. Her mother only laughed when she mentioned it. Another time Miranda was flying. She and Daddy were walking through town. There was a blizzard, very strong winds, and real snow swirls. And she was about 3 years old. Daddy held her hand, but the wind picked her up and carried her. It was a tiny distance, just 2 or 3 steps, but a real flight. These are the only 2 memories of a happy family. But it's so easy to say, even to yourself, if you're sober nonsense, it never happened, it couldn't have happened. And what was real, on the one hand, my father somewhere far away in a distant northern city. On the other, Mom and stepdad. My father never came, only called 3 or 4 times a year. And he sent gifts. A reindeer hat, pine nuts for Miranda, and money for what her daughter needed by postal order in her mother's name. And Mom and stepdad had careers. Later, when Miranda watched Western movies with an adult eye, she thought they would fit in perfectly in this life where careers ruled the roost. No, stepfather never hurt his stepdaughter, and Mom was quite attentive whether she needed to take Miranda to the children's clinic or celebrate her birthday. Mom never forgot not only the important, but even the little things, and did everything flawlessly. My mom worked as a lawyer, and her memory was phenomenal. She memorized all her clients, even their phone numbers, by heart, and if you woke her up at night, she could recite the pages of a case like poetry. If she undertook to defend someone, almost with 100% probability this person could celebrate victory in advance. The stepfather was in the construction business. Miranda took it literally. Her stepfather was tied up in the construction business, but he was in love with his bonds. Business trips, clients, new projects, he could only talk about these things at home. And my mother about court hearings, about the defense arguments, about sarcastic prosecutors and their triumphs, more like a victory in a fight. And so often one would say to the other stepmother's stepfather, or vice versa, "I'm proud of you." This pride was evident. During the time my mother lived in her second marriage, they changed several apartments, each time moving to a more spacious one and closer to the historical center. The brands of cars changed. The resorts to which my mother and stepfather went on vacation became more and more prestigious and expensive. And on the other side was Miranda and her life. For a while, a long time ago, Mom had wanted them to be friends. And then it just sort of went straight to another dimension. It's good that you're growing up on your own. Soon you'll be living on your own, and then. Miranda used to go camping. She was 12 years old when she joined the Young Hikers Club. The leader of the hikers was the same, the restless Margot, with a stick up her ass, as her stepfather used to say. And so it began. Every weekend, a hike in the surrounding mountains, even in winter. They returned in the early twilight, drunk with frost, hungry, because there was never enough tea in the thermos and pies, and did not hurry to scatter home, but sat in the club exchanging impressions, telling stories, making plans. And Miranda came home the way her stepfather probably came home to the hotel on business trips just to spend the night. And during the vacations. Then we'd take a train to some glorious city, and Margot would swear because the guys would play The City Goes to Sleep and The Mob Wakes Up all night long, and the girls would lock themselves in the bathroom and spend half an hour there to put on makeup with sense, with purpose, with care. And really, you can't walk around San Francisco without makeup. It's like going barefoot in the street. Or we rafted down the river in kayaks, went on the Zhigulevskaya around the world trip, or on a horseback ride. If Miranda had been asked about her plans in those years, she would have said she would never settle down, never put down roots somewhere in one place like those closest to her did. She wants a house on the water, some sort of very simple yacht. And after the small journeys, the big journeys are sure to follow. when now you can go to Ireland, to the Emerald Isle. You can live in a haunted castle, dance in the street on St. Patrick's Day, and then pull up the anchors and sail to the opposite end of the earth somewhere in New Zealand, to another Emerald Island, so that the whole world can be hugged like that pillow before going to sleep, and enjoy its beauty when reality is more beautiful than any dream. Soon, very soon, she will be on her own feet, and then goodbye to the cold house and the ambitious dreams of its inhabitants. She has enough of herself and a backpack on her back. Her family are sober people and know that their desires have limits. And what Miranda wanted was always over the top. And she did not try to seize what she admired, to appropriate it for herself. It was enough for her that she saw it, that it existed under the sun. All these amazing cities, castles, waterfalls, depths. And then everything changed and ended. In one day, or rather one evening. The very night the circus came to town. No, she wasn't going to go to the show. Miranda avoided taking money from her mother unless she could do without it. When she started earning her own money, that would be different. It was just a spring evening on her way back from the club. She was on her way through the park, and there was a colorful tent, and the wagons were close together, one to another. Everyone around was enjoying the warmth, almost the first of the year. Already they wanted to throw off their coats and jackets. Already they could see the coming summer ahead. There was a queue at the iron fence at the entrance, where they were checking tickets. Miranda had never seen so many children all winter, both very young, in strollers and a little older, and almost all of them were holding white and cotton candy clouds. Miranda was drawn to the carriages. They were so different in this celebration of life, tired, with peeling paint, with wheels that had measured thousands of kilometers. They smelled of sweat, old age, and cheap powder. Miranda stroked one of them with the palm of her hand, a motion of compassion. "Come here," she suddenly heard a voice say. It wasn't someone real calling out to her, a voice sounded in her head. Please, it didn't say, but Miranda realized that this someone was asking for her. She almost whispered back, but how, and immediately realized what she had to do. Just get on all fours, or even crawl, and crawl into that circle. But in the carriages, live circus performers and their animals. And of course she'd be chased out of here right away. At best, they'll call her a fool, because there are predators here. At worst, they'll think she was trying to steal something. But she couldn't refuse the voice. And so, moving like a caterpillar, pushing with her legs and knees, she crawled the few meters. Now the voice sounded as if the unknown man were speaking directly into her ear. "Let me out." She jerked, tried to look around, and immediately banged her head painfully against the metal bottom of the wagon. No one was near her, but someone was calling out to her. At the same time, Miranda saw that there was no one on the small platform that the cars surrounded on all sides. Then she decided to climb out. That cage was right above her. Above where she had just crawled. There was no other way to call it a cage because it was a frequent grating, and inside it sat a man. A boy about the same age as her. He was looking at her, but his lips did not move, and she heard it clearly again. "Let me out. Open the latch. No one should be in a cage, no living thing. My mother told me that once, when Miranda was a little girl and they took her to the sea. Every time she passed a fisherman, she tried to save a single fish. Stealthily snatch it from the bucket and release it into the sea. But now she wasn't at all sure she could handle the lock. Just pull the latch to the side. It sticks sometimes. Pull it hard, one pull." That impatient voice ... Did it actually sound, or did she hear it in her head? Miranda pulled the latch with both hands, writhing with effort. Then she stood on her tiptoes and pushed against it with her skinny body. And that's when the latch finally slid sideways, smooth as butter. The boy was already standing near the door, and when he heard the click, he opened it with lightning speed. And faster than Miranda realized what was happening, he slid under the wagon and was gone. "Who are you? What's your name?" "I'll find you, Miranda," she said. And before she could answer, the last words came out. She needed to get out of here as fast as the former prisoner had disappeared. But at the same moment, she saw an older man. More like an old man, a tall, thin man in a blue shirt and jeans. He was carrying 2 buckets, probably on his way to feed the animals. When he saw the open cage, he did not set it down, but dropped his burden and raised his palms. "I only got here now ... I'm late ... Didn't manage to stop you ... girl. What did you do?" What's that boy in there for? He's being punished, isn't he? Miranda asked, trying to establish some kind of rapport with the old man. But the man only shook his head. Maybe it's a good thing you did it, but what happens now? Get out of here if you can. Miranda didn't have time to take his advice. A woman entered the small area, surrounded by carriages and hidden from view. She was about 35 years old, and there was so much inner strength in her that even her step was dancing. Her dark hair hung to her shoulders, and she was very pretty, but that wasn't what impressed Miranda. The woman was eating a rose. Yes, she was holding a red rose on a long stem and devouring it voluptuously like ice cream. The old man seemed to hold his breath the moment the woman saw the open door and the empty cage. She raised her thin eyebrows in surprise and turned around to the old man. It said without words that she was waiting for an explanation. The old man waved his hands. I only came now. I saw for myself what you saw. It was too late to run. And Miranda braced herself for the reprimand she was about to receive. The boy probably deserved a severe punishment, and she'd set him free. The woman handed the old man the tattered flower and walked toward Miranda. The closer she came, the more uncomfortable she felt. When the stranger leaned over her so that Miranda could feel her breath on her, she was seized with an irrational terror. The woman held her by the shoulder, and her fingers were strong, as if made of metal. You stole from us, sweetheart. It took Miranda gathering all her courage to answer. But if that boy lives with you, he'll come back. He'll go for a walk and then he'll come back. He's not coming back. A smile appeared on the woman's lips, and Miranda felt as if she were about to share the rose's fate. The stranger bent down, and there's no way out. Bright green eyes, that glowing hue that no living person could ever have, stared straight at her. For what you have done, you will get a present. The woman's voice became ingratiating, cooing, like a predator enjoying her prey. Oh, not now. But the hour will come, and you will surely get it. You won't be able to refuse my gift, and then nothing will save you. Get out. Her fingers loosened on Miranda's shoulder, but the pain remained. The girl felt that her right arm was barely obeying her, just a whip. The old man hurriedly, nudging her in the back, led her out of the courtyard and onto the wicket, behind which the people with tickets were crowding. Stepping back a few steps, Miranda turned around. The old man was still looking at her, shaking his head. The expression on his face was as if he were saying goodbye to someone who was hopelessly ill. Maybe I shouldn't go. Miranda asked her husband for the umpteenth time. It's probably a divorce ... who would bequeath the house to me. Neither my dad nor my mom would do that. And besides, we're talking about a will, and they're still alive. Thank God ... She hoped William would listen to her. He liked to amuse himself by talking to crooks. When he received another warning that someone had gained access to his bank deposit, he would make himself comfortable on the sofa and say, feigning alarm, that he had millions in his account, and of course he was very worried about them. Therefore, of course, he was ready to fulfill all the orders of the investigator. Then followed a half-hour conversation, during which William pretended to be an idiot who had to explain everything 20 times. And only when he had driven the crooks to a frenzy did he laugh obscenely loud, send them to the mother lode, and call it a day. But now her husband was unaccustomedly serious. Let's go there and find out, he suggested. There really is a notary at that address, and has been for years, he said. If it's a stupid joke, they'll explain it to us. We're not risking anything. What if? Well, what the hell? I had to agree to it heartily. And it was so fortunate that on the day Miranda had bargained for, they were both free. The young woman had even mapped out an escape route for herself. If the inheritance turns out to be a hoax, they will go to a small bistro nearby as a sign of moral compensation. The ice cream cocktails, they were very good. And it's been so long since they've been out together with William. In fact, Miranda was prepared to have the notary's office point them out the door as soon as she said her last name. That's the first we've heard. There's no inheritance for you. And no one called you. But they were politely invited to wait in the reception area. They had to wait in line for an hour. Miranda was getting more and more nervous, occasionally taking her husband's hand and squeezing it tightly. Then she let go and looked at William with a guilty smile. He nodded reassuringly, saying, "Wait, it'll all work out." Finally, their turn came, and now the notary, a blooming woman in her 50s, pulls out papers from a file and reads out in her usual rapid-fire voice that the will makes Candy Adamson the owner of the house located at. William's face reflected complete amazement. It was a dream to live in a place like this. An ancient boulevard that stretched through the center of the city and ended at the foot of the mountains. They had never hoped to live in one of these mansions. It was simply impossible. Probably we're talking about some backwoods chicken shed after all. Miranda, on the other hand, had other things to worry about. How she interjected. "Could you please tell me the name of the woman who left me all this?" Tiffany Gilbert, the notary read in syllables. "I knew her. She came to me many times. Her grandson was a troublemaker, a drunk. But the grandmother herself was wonderful. Almost to the last day she was running around the stores by herself with those Nordic poles. She survived the blockade, by the way." Things got very confusing. To the notary, too. The woman pushed her glasses up on her nose and shifted her eyes from Miranda to William and back again. "So you're saying you didn't know her at all?" "What about that son of hers?" William asked. "In order to change the conversation, he won't sue us? After all, he probably hoped to inherit from his mother." "The son, as far as I know, died before she did. It's not uncommon for alcoholics to have parents who get over them. Maybe that's what got Tiffany Gilbert down." "And how did the grandmother blockade survivor get such a house?" "As far as I know, such old ladies have time to save up for their funerals and only." "Her husband was a famous man." The notary's voice became drier, as if William's over-suspiciousness was unpleasant to her. "So ... sign here ... now here." It didn't seem to occur to the notary that such an inheritance could be refused. William, too, waited impatiently for Miranda to sign here, and wherever there was a check mark. So the young woman went outside as a homeowner. Miranda and William looked at each other. They both had the same thought to go to see. "Hold on, I'll call my mom," William said, and pulled out his phone. Miranda didn't want to see Peggy Urton again, but she understood her husband. Mom had been with him all her life, and Miranda had only been with him for 3 years. So he wanted to share his joy with someone he'd become diffusely attached to. Miranda mentally groaned her scientific terms again. She couldn't think or speak otherwise. Peggy Urton was apparently so shocked that she took the unprecedented step of calling a cab. Normally she would have considered this a hobby and calculated how much of her pension would be eaten up by such a millionaire's game. But when they reached the house, Peggy Urton was already there. They recognized the mansion from a distance because a familiar figure was walking along the sidewalk and wringing her hands in delight. She believed in this miracle that had fallen on their heads. Maybe because she'd been waiting for miracles all her life, dreamed of winning the lottery or find the treasure, waiting for God to say to her, as in the commercials, "You deserve it." "Did you bring the key?" was the first thing Peggy Urton asked, forgetting to say hello. William spread his hands. "We just wanted to see." It was a house of old brick, of some dull purple color. It had arched windows, a mezzanine, a balcony with a wrought iron lattice, and a front lawn, like the neighboring mansions. "How could you not even know about the key?" Peggy Urton reprimanded. "We have to figure out the scope of work." Miranda looked at her in bewilderment and noted that it was probably the first time her mother-in-law had ever treated her as an equal. Miranda had been in disgrace before, and often when they met, her mother-in-law spoke only to her son, and it was as if her daughter-in-law were not even there. There was an official reason, of course. "She takes other people's children, but she can't have her own," her mother-in-law had once said, and Miranda had heard it. But in her heart, Miranda thought she just didn't like her mother-in-law. There are times when a person arouses antipathy, and no matter how much you smash him to pieces. Now Peggy Urton was excitedly explaining to her specifically. "I can already see that the windows here need to be changed. We can measure them today and order plastic ones. I know a company that gives senior citizens a discount." "How can you ruin such an antique?" Miranda wondered. Then a neighbor called out to them. Peggy Urton hurried to her, asking for the key, and it turned out that there was a key, and the neighbor was about to bring it out. Miranda hesitated, delaying until the last minute, the moment when there would be no way out and she would have to enter the house. On the other side, an elderly neighbor was mowing his lawn and occasionally glanced curiously at the new tenants. Miranda took a few steps in his direction. "Did you buy a house or something?" the neighbor asked. "It was an inheritance," Miranda said, her tone apologetic to Miranda's surprise. Not only did the old man not congratulate her, he did not say anything friendly, as one might expect. On the contrary, he nodded his head as if in sympathy. "Are you going to turn it in?" he asked, as if still hoping for something. No, Miranda glanced around. The door was open, so her husband and mother-in-law were already checking out the new property. "I guess we'll be moving here ourselves." The old man lost interest in her and went back to his lawnmower. "Why did you ask?" Miranda asked before she left. He shrugged. "Because it's not going to end well. Nobody lives here for long." "You don't like it?" Miranda asked cautiously. The old man shrugged. "Sorry, I didn't get a chance to ask. Today the tenants are still here, and they don't seem to be going anywhere, and tomorrow they're gone. No one's been here more than a year." "Excuse me, but the landlady?" Miranda suddenly remembered she's owned this house for years. So she didn't live here. She was a renter. I only ever saw her when she came to meet the new tenants and show them around. What would scare them away? It didn't sound like a direct question, but like Miranda was thinking out loud. The old man was silent for a moment, then pointed a bony finger toward the house. "I've been living here myself for 50 years, so I can't say that others don't like it. But I've worked it out. If the shutter's close, you're waiting for new tenants." "What do you mean?" Miranda asked in confusion. The landlady would come, close the shutters, and then bring the people who wanted to rent the house. Nope. The old tenants were still here. You know, people aren't used to shutters. It doesn't even occur to them to close them at night. Why is it that one evening the shutters are suddenly closed? And nobody opens them in the morning? A day or two goes by and the landlady brings someone new. She unlocks the windows and doors and shows the house in all its glory. "If you're going to live here, you might be able to clear up this mystery." Miranda saw her husband walking toward her from the house, and that he was happy as can be, smiling ear to ear. "Don't you want to look at it?" he asked before he could approach. "Go take a look. You'll like it." "I doubt it," Miranda muttered quietly. The men shook hands, and William spoke again. Miranda realized at once that he was stinking with joy. She called it verbal incontinence. His husband talked about everything at once, straying from topic to topic. He asked if the rent was high and what was the land tax. He always mentioned that he was glad to meet the neighbors, and of course shared his plans for what he wanted to build here. A garage and a bathhouse first and foremost. The old man listened aloofly, and eventually the animation in William's voice began to fade. "Come on," her husband took Miranda's hand. "You'll see how nice it is inside. You'll like it." She really liked it. The corridor is very wide and bright, and the windows look out onto the garden. And in winter you can put plants in tubs and look at the greenery all year round. Big rooms. And where there was a hall, as they call the most spacious room, would fit their entire current apartment. Peggy Urton's eyes lit up, and she talked so enthusiastically about the renovations as if the house belonged to her, as if Miranda was nobody. The young woman only noted this, but took no offense. She waited politely for her mother-in-law to shut up and felt sorry for the way things had turned out. William sensed something. "Do you agree with everything Mom suggests?" he asked. "Is there anything you'd like to change?" Peggy Urton stopped precisely at a run-up. She looked at Miranda, as if she were looking at an unfortunate obstacle that might interfere with her plans. But the young woman only shook her head. "I don't really care. Do as you see fit. Vitya, when we take Mom, let's stop at a cafe and order a large cocktail." William liked to remember how they met. He thought it was very beautiful and romantic. Miranda had gone on vacation with her mother and stepfather. Not because she had succumbed to her mother's entreaties. It was just that the camping trip Margot had planned had fallen through. The head of the hiking club ended up in the hospital. She had to have her gallbladder removed as a matter of urgency. "I've been going somewhere all my life, eating what's cooked in a cauldron. Some porridge with stew. How can I be healthy?" Miranda was very upset then. All winter long she had dreamed of these 2 weeks on horseback and in her native mountains. The starry sky at night, the legends Margot was good at telling, the honeyed smell of flowers, the tea that smelled of smoke, and the camaraderie that was the strongest in the world. Her mother noticed Miranda walking around upset, her eyes wet, found out what was wrong, and solved the problem in one fell swoop. "You're coming to Egypt with us," she said, "and don't be naughty, please. It's a great hotel, and you'll find something to do without us if you're bored." The stepfather expressed neither joy nor displeasure, and the matter of the trip was settled. Miranda was going into her senior year of high school that summer. She hadn't vacationed with her mother in a long time, and now that she was looking at her with adult eyes, she wondered if her mother was partying her ass off. Usually reserved, energetic, decisive, a real businesswoman, now she behaved like a child, ready to agree to any adventure. "Jump into the water from the rocks, please. A party on a yacht in the open sea, she is the first. To try some new exotic dish, give only a fork." And even at the disco, her mother danced as if she were 20 years younger than she really was. If that's what she considers real life, if that's what she is, how can she suppress it for a whole year? Miranda thought. So it's back home, mom's not real, keeping herself in line. How hard that must be. She herself remained as she had always been. She couldn't stand the heat very well, and it was hard to tempt her to go sightseeing or stroll the local streets. But the hotel was nice, and Miranda spent most of her time in its coolness. But she liked the sea very much. Miranda was not a good swimmer, and her greatest pleasure was just sitting in the water, wearing a mask, and looking at everything around her, at the magnificent underwater world. Mom noticed this and organized a scuba diving trip. With an instructor, of course, but the swarthy guy, who swam like a fish, paid more attention to his mother and stepfather than to Miranda. He decided to show them some underwater caves. The girl, however, found herself in the depths, at some point panicked, and she immediately became short of breath. Perhaps the worst thing is to panic. In the blue haze surrounding you from all sides, you can no longer understand where the top is, where the bottom is. You try to surface, you get desperate, because the surface is not approaching. Your movements become cramped, your throat spasms. It was good that William had been there at that moment and had picked up Miranda, who was hysterical, and surfaced with her. He had said many times afterward that he didn't know what would have happened without him. And Miranda could sense that he was proud of himself. Then they did not part for the rest of the vacation. Miranda's mother, who had not even noticed the incident, was pleased that her daughter had found herself a good boy. William introduced Miranda to his parents, but the girl immediately felt that Peggy Urton did not like her. Probably the latter thought that Miranda was too simple for her son. William was a tall, handsome boy, and here she was a tanned, ponytailed brat. But the young people spent almost all their time together, and no one could prevent them. And the memory of the underwater adventure, of saving the girl, remained the most vivid and dear for William. Now Miranda had the feeling that her husband was drowning, and now it was her turn to save the day. Jeremy had been told from childhood that he was a special child, but he hadn't noticed it for a long time. Reading other people's thoughts was as easy for him as noticing that it was raining or sunny outside. He answered questions before his parents had time to ask them, and it was useless to secretly think up a birthday present for him. And when he was a baby, he often embarrassed his mother on walks by telling her in his sonorous baby voice what people were thinking as they walked toward him. ... But he didn't want anything that time. Honestly, he was old enough, 10 years old, to control himself perfectly well. And by the way, he'd never really liked the circus. His classmates had dragged him to see the show. And he could have gotten away with it. He would have left the circus with the rest of them, if he hadn't been so stupidly caught in the act. When the magician, who looked very tired and not at all fun at heart, asked someone from the audience to help him, Jeremy, to his misfortune, volunteered. He was blindfolded, forced to turn his back, and the magician went into the auditorium to hide a crystal egg from someone in the audience. Then the magician removed a thick black blindfold from Jeremy's eyes and waved his hand in the direction of the gathered people. They said, "Choose who has it." It was supposed to start a game of cold and hot, but Jeremy did not think for a minute. He said, pointing with his chin at a heavy-set man. And he advised, "You'd better switch at once. He will give you the egg, and you will give him the live rooster. After all, you still wanted to get it and say that the uncle had hatched it out of the egg, like a hen." The audience laughed, and the magician laughed. After the show, the circus performers, though whether they were circus performers, vampires, or evil sorcerers, was more like them, asked Jeremy how he'd done it, and what else he could do. He spoke honestly about his abilities, adding that he gets along well with them in ordinary life, and he is not going to perform in the circus. The most beautiful of the women ruffled his hair. "Think about it. If you ride with us, you'll be rich and famous. We can ask your parents to let you go." Jeremy even laughed. imagining how his dad and mom would react to such a suggestion. They'd worry if he was half an hour late at school or at a friend's birthday party. They'd let him go to who knows where, with who knows who. I don't know. Finally, Jeremy was released, and he ran out into the park, drenched in the last rays of the sun, which was about to disappear over the horizon. His friends were waiting for him, and everything seemed to be the same as usual, running home with the boys. A delicious dinner prepared by his mother's stew with potatoes and cakes for tea. But it was as if someone had put an ice flake down his neck, and it wouldn't melt. And the next morning, hurrying to school, he saw the very beauty from the circus. She stood slender, flexible, in black leather pants, standing near the corner of the house, and to all appearances, waiting for him. "Come here a minute," he heard him say. Only then, much later, did he realize that the woman had not uttered a word aloud. Had there been a witness to the scene, he would have said that the stranger had been silent. But her thoughts were so clear and strong that he went to them as to a call. Then he saw a van around the corner, and a moment later a black handkerchief fell across his face. Over the years, they've used different ways to keep him. They tied him by a rope, chained him, kept him in a cage. His attempts to escape were especially desperate and hopeless at first, when he knew his parents were searching for him and going mad with anxiety. From here, from afar, he couldn't read their thoughts, but he could feel how they felt, and it brought him to tears, to the point of wanting, like an animal caught in a trap, to chew off a limb and escape. But he did not compete with ordinary people. He realized that at once. His attempts were anticipated with a smile and thwarted. He was punished, but not cruelly. They could have done anything to him, for he was at their mercy. But they never hit him, never physically hurt him. More often than not, they just left him hungry, sometimes for days at a time. The traveling circus continued to travel the world, and it seemed to Jeremy that he was trapped in some ruthless mechanism, and it was impossible to get out of it, only to obey. Sometimes, very rarely, he was forced to take part in the performances, and he invariably surprised the audience to the point of exclaiming, "It can't be. It's a hell of a thing." But the main thing that was expected of him was to find others like himself. Those who could understand him when not a single word was spoken aloud, when only a mental conversation was going on. There were such people, even if only occasionally. Of course, none of them had a gift equal to the one Jeremy had. All of them turned out to be weaker than him. There were those who could see the future, but Jeremy had never met a strong clairvoyant. The people he'd pointed out had been introduced to the circus people, talked to them. And Jeremy subconsciously expected that sooner or later one of them would end up next to him in the cage. But it didn't happen. When he asked Ada, the very beauty who was in charge of them all, she only smiled. "You're the best. You're all we need. Even I can't stand to be around you." "Why do you need all these people?" he wondered. And then she spoke the very words he thought. "It's a fairy tale. It can't be real. Because of these people, we are practically immortal. Our lives don't end." And that girl who helped Jeremy eventually escape, they must have seen her as a tidbit too. Peggy Urton was learning the finer points of repair. God knows where she got her information. If she'd ever cared about the subject before, it was only in terms of envy of her friends. Peggy Urton was a homebody. Almost always something kept her from going out. In winter, ice on the streets, I'll slip and break my femoral neck, and you'll have to take care of me summer heat. I can only exist under air conditioning. Spring and fall had their own resonances. And the main means of communication with the world remained the telephone and a friend. And Peggy Urton's life remained bland and uninteresting compared to that of her friends. There were dacha feats, overcoming themselves, unimaginable harvests and industrial-scale harvesting. Sagas concerning grandchildren and granddaughters, their health, their pranks, words, gifts. And of course, His Majesty repair ideas and their realization, exciting search for materials, handy or handless sons and sons-in-law, and finally the triumphant completion of the process to begin tomorrow to change something, because there is no limit to perfection. Against this background, Peggy Urton had nothing to tell. No country house, only flowers on the balcony, no grandchildren, only a cat at the young, and it was better not to even talk about repairs, because her friends comparing with her own would have found Peggy Urton's place murdered. The only thing the elderly woman was saving for was her own funeral. After the sudden death of her husband from a heart attack, she went into debt, and now she did not want to repeat the same story about herself. But even here she was disappointed. Her son only laughed. "Mom, there's no one left on top of the earth. They're all buried somehow. Or do you want a crystal coffin and telephone service in the other world?" "I want you not to be ashamed," Peggy Urton began. "Would you to be honest care anymore?" Her friends, on the other hand, spoke with feigned sighs. "Oh, we're trying to save something too. But my granddaughter is studying in St. Petersburg. I'm helping her pay the rent. My grandson wants to change the car. My daughter needs a kitchen set." It appeared that Peggy Urton had set herself some small, secondary goal, and it was weighing her down. But now it's going to turn around. A luxurious house, a real estate. Fixing it up is not like fixing up a high-rise apartment. Peggy Urton withdrew her funeral stash, sold the shares left by her husband. But her friends, pining with envy, gave her a disturbing thought. Peggy Urton immediately summoned her son and had a long conversation with him. That same evening, William told Miranda with a nervous chuckle, "Mom wants you to sign over part of the house to her. She has invested a lot of money in renovations. So here she collected all the receipts and handed them to me for you to look at." They had never had a fight over anything material before money. Things ... William was ready to back down. But what he hadn't expected was for his wife to shine. "Do you think your mom would mind if I signed the whole house over to her? Would she accept a gift like that?" "Are you serious?" "This is as serious as it gets. I'm willing to sign a deed of gift with the same notary." Needless to say, Peggy Urton had a sleepless night when she learned of this. Plans swarmed in her head, and each one was better than the last. Then she saw a beautiful garden in an equally beautiful old neighborhood of the city, not in the outskirts of the city, where her friends' cottages were. Then she dreamed of eventually getting rid of the modern cheap stuff and furnishing the old house exclusively with antiques. Then she imagined a housewarming party, and her friends, out of curiosity, of course, would come running and be amazed. That's when it would be their turn to bite their elbows. In the morning, Peggy Urton called her daughter-in-law, not her son, but for the first time. She spoke to her with unusual warmth. Miranda was to come, by all means, and see how she was organizing the house. "It will be your inheritance after my death anyway," said the mother-in-law. Miranda shrugged as if the room was suddenly cold. She had put off this moment until the last minute, but now she had to go. Her mother-in-law showed her the house with the air of a tour guide who had her own personal museum. "And this is where the living room will be. Look at it, it's so pretty. It might be a little dark in the summer because the windows overlook the garden. The lilac bushes will grow ... I want to hang a big crystal chandelier here. I don't care if they say it's last century. The house needs the last century. And I want a fireplace. Then we can make a real one, by the way. I know how to make a stove. I learned it from my grandmother when I was a kid. In the meantime, we'll put in an electric fireplace, but to have a very good imitation of a live fire." Miranda had been following Peggy Urton from room to room for the past half hour, and the polite smile on her face made her cheekbones ache. Her mother-in-law regretted that the dining room wasn't ready yet, so coffee would have to be had in the kitchen. "And it's cozier there," she added, "and it's 2 steps from here to the pastry shop, so I bought an amazing cake. You take a walk around, see if you have any requests. And I'll call you to the table in 10 minutes. Miranda was alone with the house. Her first impression was that the place was always in semi-darkness. Peggy Urton could talk all she wanted about the crystal chandeliers and the fireplace, but even on a sunny day, the rays wouldn't reach here. Most of the windows faced north, and the shutters, and the lilac bushes, and the mezzanine balcony ... In short, it was dark without artificial light. Miranda went out into the hallway to find where the kitchen was. Suddenly she was overtaken by that distinctive smell. The smell of the circus. The smell of horse sweat. The tart smell of predators. Fresh sawdust, butterscotch, and baked goods. There was no smell of risk or applause. Miranda tried to figure out where the smell was coming from. How could it be if the painters had recently left the house? She opened one door after another and then stopped at the threshold of a small closet. Here she saw scraps of playbills on the floor, a pile of brightly colored costumes, some strange black hat, a makeup table. Miranda appealed to her sanity. Was it conceivable for Peggy Urton to keep all this stuff, not throw it away? After all, from her point of view, it was junk. Miranda blinked. The closet was empty. It hadn't been renovated, but there was no beggar here. except for the shabby walls, the board floor, and a window in the ceiling so narrow a cat couldn't fit through. The odor was much fainter now. She put her palms to her nose, and sure enough, she had just used them to grasp the door handle. She had just used them to grasp the doorknob. The odor was still there, so she had to wash her hands immediately. The bathtub was quickly found. Barbara Taylor had already had her hands in it, the ornate tile, the modern sink, the lighted mirror. Miranda shook the water off her hands and looked down at herself, petrified. A skull was staring straight into her eyes, empty black eye sockets. Not a human skull, a dog skull, and the mirror didn't show the bathroom itself. Just the skull, just darkness. Miranda not only clamped her eyes shut, she covered her face with her hands. She was afraid the skull would speak to her, and the sounds would be like a voice or a bark. When she opened her eyes, she could still see the terrible vision fading away. It gave way to her own face, deathly pale with widened eyes. "Where did you disappear to?" My mother-in-law was standing on the doorstep, the coffee's getting cold. "My God, it's as if you've seen a ghost. Come with me, I'll give you some drops." After escaping from confinement, Jeremy ended up in an orphanage. Not right away, of course. First, he tried to find his parents, and for that he had to get from the other side of the country to his hometown. He had no experience of homelessness, and he had never had to worry about food or lodging before. So Jeremy had a hard time, but somewhere hitchhiking, perfecting himself in inventing pathetic stories that could touch the harsh truckers, he still reached his home. And he learned that his mother and father no longer lived there. The father died soon after the disappearance of his son, and where the mother could have gone the neighbors did not even guess. The woman didn't share her plans with them. Maybe she could no longer see the house, where everything reminded her of her family, and if so, she probably changed the city too. He could have kept looking, but it was winter, and Jeremy was so exhausted and depleted that he acted foolishly, without thinking of the consequences. He slept in the cellars, if he could get into them, and he scrounged whatever food he could get. For example, he would go into the bistro, and while the tables were still being cleared, he would snatch a piece of bread that had been forgotten, or a pie that had not been eaten. He wore himself to rags and eventually ended up in the police station, and from there, in an orphanage. Hungry and struggling to survive. Jeremy didn't notice that he had lost his gift, and if he had, he wouldn't have regretted it. After the way fate had treated him, he considered the gift a curse, and was glad to be rid of it. But it turned out that his ability to read other people's thoughts did not disappear, but as if hibernated in hard times. And as soon as the boy warmed up and ate a little, everything came back. But now Jeremy knew that he had to treat his gift as if it were a potent substance, use it only when it was absolutely necessary. And he had to hide his gift from others so that no one would even realize it. Jeremy was fortunate in that he'd come to the orphanage after he'd mourned his parents, and he was sure he'd never find his mother. Either his tears had dried up forever. Neither sentimentality nor self-pity was in him anymore, but he was always waiting for the next blow of fate, and was ready to respond to it at least with sharp, boyish fists. And it paid off. In the orphanage, he was not bullied, he was not mocked. On the contrary, he even earned some respect. Everyone knew that he had no relatives, that he had been vagabonding for a long time. Usually such kids are not interested in studying. Sometimes they can hardly even read. Jeremy pounced on the science, as if he knew he needed it, that he couldn't do without it. The boys tried to tease him, they trumped him with their ability to sass the teacher. But Jeremy cut off such taunts at once. He began with a florid phrase, almost entirely made up of foul words. It was an invitation to be listened to. And then he said he wasn't going to work a penny job or drink himself to death. "Life owes me a lot," he teased. Spitting through a knocked-out tooth was convenient. But what even the teachers, accustomed to their pups going to college at best, didn't expect was that Jeremy applied to medical school and passed the competition. There was no one around him with whom he could share his designs. "You'll learn, biology teacher. You're good. We'll be treated by you later." And Jeremy wanted to deal with the superpowers of man, and to understand what nature gave him, and what these terrible people, who almost broke his life, hoped to get from him. His brain was designed for scientific work. None of his classmates had such a tenacious memory, such a pronounced ability to generalize and analyze. And in his senior year, his mentors had already said definitely that Jeremy had a place in graduate school, that he should think about a PhD. As he had no one to support him, he worked part-time at the hospital in his spare time. He did not want to stay in a hostel, and as soon as the opportunity arose, he rented an apartment. That was the beginning of his library and card catalog. He collected very specific things. There was a lot written on the subject that interested him, but he did not want to chase sensation but facts. And also he was tracing the path of the very circus that seemed immortal. One could leaf through old newspapers, go deeper and deeper into the past, and be convinced the troupe existed even then. It kept traveling around the world. But at the same time it described a circle, invariably at regular intervals returning to the same city. And the circusmen stayed there not in hotels, not in the most run-down motels. The same house beckoned them, as if it were their own. They put their carriages in its yard, and from here they started their new wanderings around the world. More and more often the Ouroboros came to Jeremy's mind the most ancient symbol, the snake biting its tail, the alternation of creation and destruction, life and death, the beginning of a new cycle. And if he mosaicked all the evidence he had gathered, if he could believe the picture, it was only a matter of time before the new cycle began. In a short time they would be there again, in that town, near that house. It was frightening to think about. I wondered if that girl who had saved him back then had survived. Jeremy thought of her from time to time. He hoped she hadn't had to pay for it. But himself, was he still so attractive to them, to this traveling troupe? He felt he was. Which meant he had to go there to test a hunch. And to do that, he needed the circus people to know where he was. This whole thing was a hell of a bait and switch. He knew he'd get drunk, but it had to be done thoughtfully, to get to that point that only you can feel, when the fear that my mom that was a century ago called ugly recedes. Instead of fear comes the feeling that now, as in some game, you are going to take up a sword and go to crush your enemies left and right, not thinking that you yourself might fall from a dashing blow. He needed that kick from his subconscious to cross a line he'd been afraid to think about before. And at the same time, he didn't want to get so full that there would be a feeling of swings, and he'd be dizzy, and the fear would be replaced by despair at his own helplessness. Apparently, the higher powers decided that he was doing the right thing, because the hotel was found instantly. And according to the map, it was near the train station. It didn't matter to Jeremy what conditions he would live in. If he was alive in a few days, he would leave this city and try to forget it forever. And if he had nightmares in his sleep, it wouldn't be a lousy number. He threw his bag on the bed, locked the door again, and went to find a bar where he could sit for a long time without being disturbed. A boulevard crossing the center of the city started from the station square. Everything here was so bright, so light, so benign, and so far from what his soul was full of. Two white trees like emerald candles, beds of roses, souvenir stands. He peered around the bar with the kind of painful scrutiny that a sick man would look for in a drugstore. At last he caught sight of the basement. The heavy door at this hour of the morning was open to his surprise, and he hurried downstairs. And in the cool, semi-darkness of the place, you couldn't tell the day was just beginning. Not a single customer yet. Jeremy was the first. He chose a table in the far corner, asked the bartender to open a bottle of whiskey, and bring some kind of appetizer. He thought he'd learned to control himself. But the whiskey had come earlier, and Jeremy poured himself a bottle of whiskey, so much so that the bartender would have called it not a double but a quintuple whiskey, and drank it like water. That's what he'd come to. It was only then that he let go a little, the tight knot of fear loosened, and he could breathe. The waitress came over and put a plate of sausage and breadcrumbs in front of him. There's nothing else. He heard her apologetic tone and thought he should pay at once. He didn't know how his sit-down was going to end. The girl immediately understood his gesture. It meant both no change and get out of here. It seemed like an hour or more had passed. Jeremy was sipping his whiskey now and thinking about the fact that there was no way he was going to be able to play in the open. The odds were too unequal, and there was very little chance that the trap he had planned would work. He realized that this time he was risking not his freedom, but his life. And these creatures were capable of such a thing that death would seem like deliverance. Someone sat down across from him, and Jeremy looked up. It was a girl, very young, in a blue dress. She kept her eyes on him, and he thought the waitress had called her. Maybe she felt sorry for him. From the outside, he must have epitomized bitter loneliness. Or maybe she thought he was a tempting prey, easy to get her hands on for money. "Would you like a drink?" he asked the girl. "Then get yourself a glass." It seemed to him that everyone now wanted to escape the madness of the big by immersing themselves in the small. The girl drank and said something to him, touching his hand lightly. And she was sneaking sausage off the plate, sneaking it, trying to be sneaky. She wanted to look pretty, but she was probably very hungry. Jeremy could see that she was trying to please him. For the first time in a long time, he looked with that attentive gaze in which his gift was awakening. Yeah, she was living on a shoestring. She rented a room for two with a friend and spent the money she earned on clothes. After her poverty-stricken childhood, she was attracted to every brightly colored rag. She couldn't get enough of everything. Now she needed shoes, pink, high heels. But she really liked him young, nice-looking, not pushy. He had to go, damn it, he had to go. He took 2 red bills out of his wallet, placed them on the table, and then took the girl's hand and put her palm down on the bills. "Kathleen," he said, "buy yourself some shoes." He patted her shoulder a little and went on his way, ignoring her shocked face. He knew the address, and it appeared that it was the same boulevard he had to follow all the way to the end. A streetcar rang on his right hand. Here was a photographer, laying out national costumes on a bench, waiting for customers. A store selling shawarma and chibareks. An old building of a polyclinic. Fountains. The boulevard rose upward, and every now and then the level path was replaced by steps, and one could not sink into deep reverie as he wished. One had to remember not to stumble. Finally, when he couldn't wait any longer, Jeremy sighed a deep, convulsive sigh. Shoving his hands in his pockets, he walked toward the house. Toward the house. He expected to find the place dilapidated and desolate, but he stopped in amazement. The house had clearly become truly residential, and the new owner had decided to make it as good as any. The white plastic windows seemed decidedly out of harmony with the brick, which was not even 100 years old. He also noticed the curtains obviously new. What is this doing? Jeremy looked around, as if he wanted to call the people around him as witnesses. He noticed the old man next door, who was looking at him with his eyes shaded from the sun. "No one's home," said the old man. "The landlady hasn't come yet." Jeremy realized that the conversation might be a respite for him, and walked over to the fence that separated 1 yard from the other. "Who's the hostess?" "You don't know." Now the old man's look was suspicious. "What's the matter? Do you want to buy a house?" Not exactly. Well, how, in fact, was to explain everything to an ignorant person. In a few days About here, I have to meet friends. They know the landlady well, and I just arrived earlier. "So you're a guest?" The old man went on inquiring. His eyebrows were white and bushy, which made him look menacing. "Children are afraid of such old men. Have you come to visit?" "Sort of." "Can you tell me a little bit about the missus?" "I don't like gossip." The old man wanted to get back to his business, but he said, "Especially in this house, gossiping is not worth it." And that was a clue to a new conversation, because after those words, Jeremy couldn't move away from the fence. No amount of force would make him. "I hear there are some bad things going on in this house," he said casually. "Heard from where?" "From whom?" And again the look of those blue eyes, so bright they seemed icy. But hell, he couldn't tell the old man that this house is a kind of dining room for ... After that, the neighbor. If he says anything, it will be on the phone. Dialing 03, "Come here. There's a psycho. Take him away before he makes trouble." "I used to live in this town," Jeremy said with the look of a man in a hurry who wanted to talk. "And I remember the circus used to stop here. Right on this lawn." But these words of the old man were unexpectedly convincing. Who indeed could have known about it except the old-timer? It was a long time ago. You must have been very young. How can you not remember ... Here, everyone who lives around here were afraid that these lunatics would do something crazy. They'd get drunk, set fire to something drunk, God forbid. They'd get into a fight. They didn't. In general, the circus has come here twice in my memory. Jeremy raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yeah, that's the case you were talking about. That was 25 years ago. And before that you still have to measure a quarter. You weren't around then, but I was then, like you are now. Well, it's been 25 years again. Maybe they'll come again. They will, Jeremy said thoughtfully, yet confidently. They can't not come. I was surprised it had been so long, and I thought the house had been torn down. At that time it was ownerless. You can't tear this house down that easily. He is himself, but the old man did not continue. Were you inside? Jeremy knew he had been, but he could only read his mind when the old man started to remember. And the old man told him that it was strange for many years he had never established such a relationship with any of the inhabitants of the house that he could easily visit each other. It's like a kaleidoscope. Some lived there, then others I can't remember them all. Once a young couple asked me to feed their cat, they left me the key. They were going somewhere. I went and fed it. Well, it's all right. The old man's gesture begone was completely unexpected. Jeremy flinched. What is it? On the third day, a cat went missing. He disappeared from a locked house. I wanted to give up myself by then. It seems like everything is normal around there. Well, the most ordinary things. But when you walk around the rooms, you start to see the hell of what you see. I've never suffered from nerves. But this is not good at all. There's no animal, that's all. And all the windows are closed. I think, how will I report to the young ones? And they didn't come back. They left, and that was the end of it. I've kept the key to the house ever since. No one's ever asked me for it. The new owners must have changed the lock. It's not the main door, not the front door, but the back door. I see. And tell me about the last hostess. Jeremy knew that a house could change hands in many ways, but only its true owners could pass it on. It's just a girl, Miranda. She inherited it. Only she gave it to her mother-in-law right away. She's the one who's been renovating it. Young people don't need all that. The land, greenhouses. They're not ready to put down roots yet. They've got wind in their heads, going here and there. My mother-in-law doesn't live here yet, but she'll probably move in soon. She's already brought some potted flowers. I don't think they'll survive here. There's not enough light. You wouldn't happen to know how to find Miranda, would you? The old man shrugged. I think she works at a maternity hospital. And there's only one in town. But I can't say for sure whether she is there or not. All the same, Jeremy shook the old man's hand sincerely. Thank you very much. He was lucky the second time, which was much more important. The first time he'd found a suitable hotel at the first request, and there was room. And now, when he looked up the phone number of the maternity hospital on the internet and asked for Miranda, a girl came up. As soon as he started talking about the house, he knew from her startled silence that it was her. Can I meet you? He asked. Jeremy was prepared for Miranda to refuse him, and then he'd come to her in the hospital and lay down his life, but she'd listen to him. The girl doesn't realize that she's destined to be the bloody delicatessen at the meal that's already in progress. And only if they act together will she have a chance. His own chance will increase a little. But there's no risk. What do you want to tell me? Heard Jeremy. Please ... preferably today ... pick any place that is convenient for you. I'll take half an hour tops. She must have heard the pleading intonations in his voice, was silent for a few moments, and then said with determination, Good. There's a little cafe near this house. I'll meet you there. At 4 o'clock. Miranda was almost half an hour late. It wasn't much longer. Sometimes her husband had to wait for her until late in the evening. That meant another woman in labor wasn't doing so well. But now she was standing in this small cafe, which was more like a diner, and squinting at the room. Who should recognize whom, he, her, or she, him? She wondered later how she could have thought she wouldn't recognize him at once. A young man was sitting by the window. At first she wondered if there was a movie being filmed somewhere. He looked like the hero of a movie from the 50s. A light-colored coat, dark hair, thin features. And yes, it was him. The same one who had been coming to her in her deepest deaf dreams for many years. He raised his head. He saw at once the picture that stood before her eyes. He's small, dirty, exhausted in a cage, and she, pushing on the bolt. They looked at each other, and not a single word was spoken. But they talked. It can't be. It can't be that you got this house. I'm sure this inheritance is from her. She's the one who said, you'll remember my gift. Do you know what that means? Yeah, and I don't hold out much hope of surviving. This house is a monster. You should hear it when you walk through it, the way it crunches. It's like it's kneading its bones, stretching, smelling you. A waitress came to their table, and both of them had to return to reality. Miranda wondered what the girl thought of them. They looked like a strange couple with their silent game. Without taking her eyes off Jeremy, she took the menu. Still, she had to make an effort. Tattered pages and worn plastic. Miranda thought her friend must be hungry. She was suddenly hungry too. And that was a sure sign that, despite the approaching danger, she felt a kind of confidence. Usually when she was worried, she had no appetite. But now she wasn't alone. Bring us dumplings. With broth? With sour cream? With tomato? 2 double servings. And a cup of sour cream each. They didn't notice whether they had waited long enough to order. They had too much to say to each other. How have you been living? You're asking me if I've ever forgotten that. Oh yeah. Dreams? In the orphanage they said that I often scream in my sleep. The boys used to wake me up ... when I started studying at the institute. I got hooked on pills. Antidepressants? Yeah. Chuckles. Are you married? How could I get married if I waited every day for them to get to me? They come out of nowhere. If an outsider saw all this, they'd go crazy. We didn't go crazy because we were kids. Kids are more flexible. So no wife. And I don't have kids for the same reason. They glanced over with a bitter smile of equals. Were you really hoping this would all be over for you if you gave the house to your mother-in-law? It hung on me like a weight, she admitted. I wouldn't have taken it at all, mine made me. And I also tried to talk myself into it. How do I know it was her gift? And when I went in there, I realized the house couldn't be anything else. It smells like them. They're beasts, their sweat and their powder. And I'm the only one who smells it, no one else. In everyone's eyes were crazy. They brought the dumplings. Steam was still rising above them. The smell of meat and bay leaf interrupted the memories of the terrible. Both of them gorged themselves on the food. I've tried to forget, she said when her plate was empty, have you? And I tried to learn everything I could about them. Because the day would come, the hour would come, and then there would be no getting away from it. I didn't want to be taken warm. Then explain to me. He shook his head. Don't ask me how old they are, I don't know. Some of it I had to gather from bits and pieces, some of it is speculation. Sometimes I think they're as old as the earth. Sometimes I think they come from somewhere in the Middle Ages, when people's fears materialized. And where they are now, I don't know either. Then why did you, We'll draw them up, he said, or would you try to run away? I shouldn't. You're still so young. You'll suffer for a long time. And in the end, fear will suffocate you anyway. And how do you think you're going to lure them in? Instead of answering, he closed his eyes. It was easy to do, to be in the cage he remembered, down to every scratch on the iron bars, every crevice in the floorboards. He remembered how many steps along, across, and askew. On the crevice that blew him especially hard on cold days. He would have gnawed out a loophole to escape, but they guarded not only his body but his thoughts, which was far worse. And when this girl opened the door for him, he concentrated on not thinking, not about anything else, only the pain from the nails digging into his palms. But as he gathered on the internet, in libraries, in bookstores, everything that might have touched them, he called on his memory again, painful though it was. But it required separating the grain from the chaff. Figuring out what was true and what was false in memory was the only thing he could rely on. He knew them too well to take certain things on faith. You're weaker than I am, he said. You hear only my thoughts and I hear everyone's. But now they're onto you. Maybe it's just revenge. Oh, they're very vindictive. Or maybe they're just hungry. This house isn't the only one. And when they get hungry, they wander into one of the houses like people wander into a diner. Usually it's on a harvest day an hour. This time they'll come for you, but if they know I'm here, they'll come early. Aye, she asked a little audibly. And we'll have to make sure the house wakes up early too, so that it will take them, not us, for food. She shook her head fearfully. You're groping. You're not sure of anything. And we're risking too much. You won't get another chance. Do you have the key to the house? I gave everything to my mother-in-law. I can't go to the house alone. She'll definitely follow me. Luckily, my neighbor still has the key. He's had it for ages, but maybe the lock hasn't been changed. Let's go check it out. They were indeed hungry, but only those who knew their true nature could see that. To everyone else, they were just ordinary people who met twice a day at a common table in the caravan, where EVA lived. In the mornings they drank tea, and in the evenings after the shows they stayed up late, the smell of charcoal grilled meat stirring the nostrils of passers-by. But a knowledgeable person would have noticed the twitching of their hands, which had suddenly become dry, the wrinkles on their faces, and the light that sometimes flashed in their eyes. They knew that when they were truly satiated, they would get rid of the signs of age and the hunger that tormented them from within. But they sometimes had to endure long enough, for not every prey was suitable. The prey had to be different from the human herd, and it was not always possible to find a suitable one. Immortality comes at a high price, and not everyone could withstand it. There used to be more of them, many more, but some had fallen behind along the way. This Vera ... she'd asked to be let go, to be left to live near one of their houses. What the hell she was eating there, picking up scum. No wonder she eventually grew old and died. Eve felt her death. She was the most empathetic of them all, always knowing exactly what they needed and how they could get it. So it came naturally that she became senior to them. But never had she met such an attractive prey as that boy. That was why no one dared to infringe on his life. Their power multiplied with him, and he was bound to become one of them sooner or later, if he hadn't escaped. Now they will have to settle for less, much less. Vera is gone, and now their cottage belongs to someone else ... Well, happiness for the owners if they don't mess around. Can you feel it? Miranda asked as they entered the house. Jeremy made a sign with his hand to wait. He stepped as carefully as if he were walking on a taut wire, carefully calibrating his every step, holding his breath. He was afraid to disturb, to wake the house before its time. And yet it seemed to Miranda that something was already beginning to happen. The air wavered slightly, as it would over a campfire. The floorboards crackled a little louder, and the floor seemed to waver slightly. Then Jeremy couldn't stand it, pointed to the new window and raised his eyebrows slightly. "It's the mother-in-law," Miranda whispered hastily. "She's in charge of all the changes around here. I wonder how the house didn't chew her arm off. She is so mediocre that she was probably of no interest to him." And they managed to get the key without any problems. The old man even followed them to see if the young men could open the back door. He had kept the key for so many years, and he was curious. Jeremy saw at once that the key would fit. It slid into the keyhole so easily that it turned on its own. The old man left, and they entered the house. Here not only did the corridor that ran through the entire mansion begin. From here, from the back door, stone steps led down to the cellar. That's where they both went down in the first place. Of course, Peggy Urton, with her great household plans, couldn't help getting to this corner of the house. The cellar was empty, the workmen having removed all the junk that had accumulated there over the years. And the shelving units they'd ordered hadn't arrived yet. Just a dungeon, just a crypt. A ray of light, which seemed blue, fell from a narrow window in the ceiling. Jeremy stood a few feet from the window, his head up. The light had transformed his face. Too, it had lost its natural color, drenched in that dead blue. Jeremy closed his eyes and whispered something inaudible. Miranda realized that the irreversible was happening now. He was calling out to them, and he seemed to have succeeded in reaching their minds. Then he opened his eyes and turned to Miranda, but his gaze was crazy, like that of a frightened child. She took both his hands. "Did you succeed?" He tried to swallow. It didn't work on the first try. "They'll be here tomorrow night." "And what are they?" "They can't believe their happiness." Peggy Urton ventured to spend the first night in her new home. Her bedroom had been ready for a long time. But to be honest, the new owner had dreamed of doing things differently. To organize a housewarming party, to invite her friends, and after a noisy feast, scattered among the rooms to sleep soundly and without dreams. It was a little scary to be alone. But the party was postponed. That friend, without whom it made no sense to organize all this, went to her daughter, and for a long time. She would be back in a month at the earliest, and Peggy Urton couldn't wait that long. "I'm as curious as Eve," she liked to say on every occasion. And now she convinced herself that there was nothing to be afraid of, that this was not some forgotten corner. This was a city, and there were people on the right and on the left. Of course, no one would dare to rob a mansion. It was not like robbing a cottage. But she chided herself for not ordering bars for the windows, and decided to do it soon. She arrived at her new home without telling her son or his wife, with a light load in her hands and a bad headache. She arrived that very evening, a couple hours before sunset. She'd been thinking since morning that she'd make a feast for herself, fry some chops while singing, open some wine. But now the thought of food made her sick. Peggy Urton dropped 2 green pills into the palm of her hand and took a drink of tap water. She thought for a moment and added another pill, for her blood pressure, just in case. Wrinkling her nose and putting her fingers to her temples, it was a little cold in the house, and her hands were still icy. She made her way to the bedroom, lay down, and covered herself with a downy shawl. She expected the pain to continue for a long time, but it suddenly receded, and unnoticed, Peggy Urton fell asleep. "They're sure it'll be business as usual," Jeremy said as they settled by the window. "After all, the deadline, 25 years, is only a few days away. That's why they'll come in to get us, you can be sure of it. They're getting close." Miranda didn't ask now if he'd succeeded in waking the house. She could sense that he was almost awake. The visions that tormented her became brighter. They flashed in succession. Wherever she looked, she saw the victims, their last moments, while for the house itself they were memories pleasant to the point of shivering, gastronomic. Miranda tried to look only at Jeremy. He was her only hope of getting out of here alive. "Why did you become a midwife?" he asked suddenly. "Ever since I've been there, I've just carried the breath of death with me," she said simply. "I wanted to be closer to the birth of life. Displace it, did you? And I wanted to know what kind of power I had been given. Why am I like this? Are there others like me?" They were silent. Maybe it lasted a long time, maybe a few moments. Something warm and sticky dripped down Miranda's cheek. She tried to wipe it away and suddenly realized. The house is drooling. You could hear the panic in her whisper. Instead of answering, he pointed to the window. She didn't understand at first, and then she was numb. There was a lawn in front of the house, lit by the light of lanterns, and there were shadows moving across it. Those tales of the unclean, which seemed so faded and naive now, assured her that the undead didn't reflect in mirrors or give shadows. But now they saw with their own eyes no people, just shadows on the grass. Here a man in a hat, here a woman in a long dress, an old woman with a beak, and more women, and men. Men. The shadows flocked to the front door, which was thoughtfully ajar. Peggy Urton woke up with a pounding heart, as if she'd had a nightmare. She didn't remember the plot of the dream, though, and she didn't understand what there was to be afraid of, but the feeling of dread wouldn't go away. She reached for the phone on the nightstand and turned it on to see what time it was. It showed that she had slept for only a little while, about 2 hours. Everything looked so calm. Moonlight was pouring in through the window, no noise. She was surrounded by things that she herself had chosen in the stores, then commanded the movers who brought them in and arranged them. There was no one and nothing foreign, nothing alien in her room. Only shadows lay on the floor, special nocturnal shadows. But should one be afraid of shadows? And yet something was happening. She looked closely and listened. Everything shook slightly. It couldn't have been an earthquake, for it had never happened in their land. It sounded more like the shaking of a horse that couldn't wait to get out of its seat. Peggy Urton hastily put on her glasses, raked her dressing gown from the chair. She never had premonitions, nor did she believe in them. But the feeling that came over her was so strong, so primal, that she could not help obeying it. Where are those damn slippers? And what on earth is going on, gentlemen? What is it? Miranda whispered. Why did they come dressed like that? She could see sadness, if not doom, in Jeremy's gaze, but his voice was as firm as ever. Maybe he wanted to reassure her with that tone. Like this? Because they've come for us, and no one else is supposed to see them. What do they want to do with us? And I don't know about me, but they want you alive. Not anymore. I mean alive not in the sense that you and I understand it. Most likely they want to make me one of them. But first. I read how they take people. True. It's a legend, but what can we rely on but legends? Nothing else. First, they become our shadows. Can we escape our own shadows? Never. Only the shadow follows the man, but now it will be the other way around. We will have to follow them. But you don't, do you? It's not, is it? Let's run to the basement. Hurry. They shouldn't have been able to turn on the lights, and there shouldn't have been the slightest noise from them. What force helped them not to trip on the steps? Jeremy held Miranda's hand tightly by the wrist. That's how you hold babies. Only the walls flashed. If the house really was surrounded on all sides, it would be a total failure. But they were lucky when they ran up the steps to the back door and opened it. There was nothing but lawn in front of them. The lawn, which here was lighted only by the moon, and the darkening garden beyond it. One last dash. When they reached the lilac bushes, they took cover behind them. "Now watch what happens," Jeremy said quietly. She could rather read it on his lips. "But what if things don't go your way? If the house is with them?" He shrugged. "There's nothing more we can do anyway." Several endless languid moments passed. Maybe during this time the circus ghosts were searching the house? And then, Miranda and Jeremy were startled by a sharp bang. It was the front door slamming shut. Then the blows came one after another, but not as hard. It was the slamming of the shutters on the windows. The house clenched its jaws. If someone stood watching the ancient mansion from across the street at this late-night hour, they would probably think they were hallucinating. It was like a stereo picture. When a kind of miracle happens before your eyes, the perspective changes, and you see something no one else sees. The house stood still, but there, inside it, some living organism was clenching its teeth. Huge jaws were walking. Someone invisible was satisfying a fierce hunger. In vain, the prey battered at the closed windows and doors. The desperate screams were silent to everyone. Almost everyone. Only the couple hiding in the lilac bushes behind the house could hear them. Miranda fell to the grass, covering her ears with her hands. She was used to the screams of women in labor, but she couldn't hear these undead cries. "Look at the smoke," she heard Jeremy's voice. Overcoming herself, she raised her head. No one would flood the boiler in the summer. Only in mid-autumn would you see smoke rising from the chimneys above the roofs. But over this house there was smoke. Thick pink changed to red, the color of fire, or blood. The smoke rose to the sky and melted into it. Are we the only ones seeing this too? Or are the neighbors calling the fire department now? Jeremy didn't answer her question. He couldn't take his eyes off the frightening and mesmerizing sight. It took quite some time before the screams subsided. Here was the last faint moan and a ringing silence. The smoke had dried up. And then, Miranda was ready to wipe her eyes. But it wasn't imagined, it was really happening. Right before her eyes, the house began to deteriorate, returning to its true age. Cracks ran down the white walls, the whiteness darkening into a dirty gray. The roof was decrepit, and in some places holes appeared in it. Instead of the now empty black openings, like eye sockets in a decaying skull. The door snapped and hung on one hinge. The outbuilding collapsed, but silently, as if in a silent movie. Now the house in front of them was not a house, but a ruin that was God knows how old. Yin and yang, Ouroboros biting itself by the tail. Everything in the world is interconnected, and the end of one thing becomes the beginning of another, and the beginning inevitably leads to the end. What did it all mean? Miranda felt like she was teetering on the brink of losing her mind. "They're not coming back," Jeremy rose with such difficulty, as if he were as old as these ruins. "It seems they can't exist without each other." The house was too hungry, and his hosts came in handy. They were its last meal. It's all over now. But Miranda couldn't get up. She had no strength. She sat on the ground, ruffling her hair with her hands, which were shaking. She couldn't even cry from the shock. But they heard the crying. A normal human cry. A woman's bitter. "Who's that?" "Neighbors?" Jeremy held out his hand to Miranda and helped her up. A woman stood a few steps away from the house. A heavy figure, robe and barefoot slippers. Miranda squinted, something familiar to her. "Wait, there's no way." "Elena? What brings Peggy here?" "Who?" "My mother-in-law." Miranda let go of Jeremy's hand and ran awkwardly, as if her legs weren't quite right yet. Yes, it was Peggy Urton. She stood there sobbing, putting her fists in her mouth, probably to keep from howling. "What is it?" "What is it?" she repeated. "How did you get here?" The women, young and old, stood a stone's throw from each other. "Why? The gas couldn't have exploded in here, could it? Why did the whole place collapse?" Peggy Urton was as confused as a small child. "You guys slept here?" Miranda finally got the message. The mother-in-law nodded shallowly. The first night. Rejoice that you made it out in time, that you're alive." Miranda took hold of her head again. "God, they almost killed Vitya's mother." Tell me, did you destroy this place? Maybe you regretted writing the deed of gift to me. You thought you didn't want me to have the house? Why would you do that? Why ruin everything? I mean, it would have gone to you in the end. Miranda looked at her mother-in-law with wide eyes and couldn't understand what she was asking her. So it's you. Peggy was already howling. Do you think I'm what? Miranda covered her eyes. Breathe, she told herself. She had to focus on breathing, or she would collapse right now, right here, just like these walls. This night had cost her too much. The street was no longer quiet. Late passers-by, neighbors running out of their houses. Some were aghast, some were filming the ruins of the house on their phones. Some were calling and demanding to send rescuers and an ambulance. The "why call anyone now?" The voices were humming, merging into the steady noise of a swarm of bees. Miranda looked back. The clearing behind her was empty. Only the moon, the grass, and the shadows of the sprawling lilac bushes. So how did it end? Jeremy asked. We sold the plot. And they sold it very well. William finally got involved. The place is golden. They grabbed the land with their hands. Of course, everything here will be demolished. The new owner will build. N knew Hosea, and Jeremy said the words, almost syllabically, emphasizing the last one. A very down-to-earth man. He has his own business. He drills wells for people. And he has a big family, a wife and 4 sons. The boys will be out there racing in the garden with their dog. And we bought my mother-in-law a summer house. She cried so much her dream was gone, and all her savings. She spent everything for this house. Her credit card is bare now. She sold her shares. She told us I'd become a beggar. So William picked out a big house for her, big enough for all her friends. I think she's a bit relieved now. Jeremy nodded. They stood at the bus station, waiting for his bus to arrive. He'd wanted to leave yesterday, but Miranda had asked him to wait a day. She wanted to say goodbye to him. She had been on night duty the night before, and now she came running straight from the hospital, tortured. He knew those sunken, and yet somehow peculiarly shining eyes a sign of long sleeplessness and of the fact that the hard duty had ended well. Why don't you stay? She repeated for the 1,500th time. They both knew that he had no one to rush to accept his patience. And they also knew the axiom that he could only stay if they were together. Otherwise, tearing up his soul. It's even harder than fighting ghosts. Shadows. And there was only one moment when he asked her that question, with his eyes. It didn't require a mental conversation, just a look. Do you love me? Will you go away with me? He asked. Her answering look expressed both struggle and anguish at the same time. And that was enough. He couldn't hurt her. She had a debt to the man who had once saved her, and who had taken care of her all these years. The heavy bus slowly pulled out of the parking lot, pulled up to the platform. The doors opened. Go on. Take the window seat. Jeremy put his arms around her and pulled her against him. They stood like that, swaying slightly. She closed her eyes. Never had she felt so peaceful and blissful. Never. Not even in the cradle. You promise? Do you remember? They had said it almost simultaneously. Now they were looking at each other. He wiped the tears from her cheeks with his palm. If ever, anything else ... this devil's circus is similar ... if, even just a premonition. I'll call you. I'll be there. I promise. I remember. He pulled away so gently that she didn't feel it right away. She saw him coming up the steps to the bus. ... It was over. But there was still eternity, the one where evil is only an accident, and where there is no fear of losing each other, for their 2 souls can become one.
Lucinda struggled to open her eyes. Her whole body ached. The IV wires were sticking out of her arm, and her mouth tasted of blood, and she was terribly thirsty. Every movement was difficult. The woman tried to remember the previous events. Here she and her husband were driving home from the anniversary of his business partner. He sat behind the wheel himself, although he drank a lot at the party. At first, everything was fine. They were almost home. Then Lucinda remembered the headlights shining in her face, And then the impact. Someone had called the paramedics. It felt like the ambulance had come pretty quickly. It loaded her into the car, and what happened next the woman did not know, because after loading into the ambulance she lost consciousness and woke up only now. A nurse entered the room and asked how the patient was feeling. "What about my husband?" Lucinda wheezed. "He's fine. He's not hurt. As far as I know, he's being questioned by the police." "Why?" "He swerved into oncoming traffic and his blood alcohol was tested. The car you collided with was unlucky. The impact threw it several meters to the side. The man behind the wheel is badly hurt and there's little chance of him surviving." "What's going to happen to my husband now?" "I don't know," the nurse shrugged indifferently. "Most likely he will be taken to the station as there is no threat to his life." Lucinda was very frightened. It seemed to her that the nurse spoke to her with a kind of contempt, and she was not mistaken. Her husband's fault was likely to kill an innocent man, and her husband had not even scratched himself in the accident. Lucinda had asked him not to drive. She'd asked him to call a cab, but he hadn't agreed, and this is the result. Maybe it was for the best, Lucinda thought as she drifted off to sleep. Lucinda had met her husband about 5 years ago. She'd been working late that night. She had no money for a cab, so she decided to go to the bus stop and wait for the bus, which now ran at least half an hour apart. It was raining heavily outside, and Lucinda didn't have an umbrella with her. As she approached the bus stop, she noticed that the bus had just pulled away from her. "What bad luck," Lucinda muttered to herself. "Now I'll have to stand here for another half an hour getting wet." However, in 5 minutes, an expensive foreign car stopped right in front of Lucinda. The window on the passenger side opened and a pleasant male voice said, "Young lady, do you need a ride?" No, Lucinda answered fearfully. "I'm waiting for the bus. Thank you." "Don't be afraid. I won't eat you." "Why don't you say something?" Liam asked in the same voice. "Answer me." "I understand you," Lucinda whispered. "Can I go now?" Liam slowly approached his wife and offered his hand. Lucinda stood up from the chair, whereupon the man pulled her tightly against him. The woman's heart was beating at breakneck speed. "Don't be afraid," Liam said as gently as possible. "I love you very much, but I won't let you play with yourself. You're mine and mine alone. Don't make me remind you of that again." The man released his wife from his embrace and said, "And now you can go. I still have work to do. Go to bed. I'll join you a little later." Lucinda, without saying a word, left the office and went up to the bedroom. How to go on living after all that she had heard, the woman had no idea at all. Since then, Lucinda's attitude toward her husband had changed a lot. She kept remembering his words and threats. Liam, on the contrary, behaved as if nothing had happened. He spoiled his wife with gifts, took her to luxurious restaurants, gave her huge bouquets of flowers every day. Lucinda, completely confused, she did not know how to respond to all this now. After all, she is not a toy, but a living person. She cannot be treated like this. But she couldn't leave Liam yet. After all, the woman hadn't worked anywhere for months. Though she still had her premarital apartment, Lucinda had nothing else and could hardly find a good job quickly. And Liam would probably do his best to make sure no one would take her in. The woman would be left completely destitute. Therefore, Lucinda saw 2 ways out of the situation: to wait until Liam himself lost interest in her, or to accumulate a safety cushion, choose the right moment and divorce her husband. Deciding that both options took time, she began to save money in secret from Liam. It certainly wouldn't go to waste, Lucinda thought. Time passed, but Liam didn't even think about leaving Lucinda. He loved her, led in his own way, with jealousy, constant control, but he still loved her. However, the man was having business problems. Competitors decided to buy out his firm on very unfavorable terms for him. And in case of refusal, promised problems with suppliers and customers, which gradually and carried out. Liam had already lost 2 major clients, which could not but affect his income. He even had to fire some employees, including his driver, to save at least some money. But he was not going to give up his lifestyle completely. Lucinda decided that this situation could play to her advantage. But on the other hand, she could not leave her husband in such a difficult period of life. Liam, wanting to find a way out of this unpleasant situation, began to look for new connections, those who could help him. He managed to interest one influential man in the city, who later became his partner. Things began to slowly get better. Liam found a new client thanks to his partner, for which he was very grateful. One day, Liam received an invitation to the anniversary of his new partner. There were no reasons for refusal, and the man together with Lucinda went to the party. His driver Liam fired, even when there were financial difficulties, and a new one was never hired. Therefore, the man himself sat behind the wheel of his car. The holiday was held at the highest level. Liam managed to meet new useful people. The same could not be said for Lucinda. She was bored among these people, so she pretended to be sick and asked Liam to let her go home in a cab. But he decided to drive his wife home on his own, especially since he'd already made all the necessary acquaintances. Lucinda asked him not to get behind the wheel after so much alcohol, but the man did not listen to his wife, saying that he is no longer a boy and can make such decisions himself. In the end, all this led to the fact that Lucinda ended up with injuries in the hospital. In the next room on the verge of life and death lay a guy who drove into her husband, and Liam himself was questioned by the police. Lucinda woke up the next morning. A familiar nurse was fussing over her bed, doing something with her IV. When she noticed Lucinda was awake, she turned to her. "How are you feeling?" she asked in an indifferent voice. "I don't know," Lucinda replied. "Probably like any other person after an accident. The police want to talk to you. Will you be able to do that now?" "Yes, of course," Lucinda said confusedly. The nurse headed for the exit, but the woman stopped her. "Wait a minute. How's the guy my husband and I crashed into feeling? I didn't think you'd be interested in that. Although you probably just want to know what kind of punishment to expect for your husband. He survived tonight, which is a good sign. His chances of living have improved considerably, although the consequences could be very unpleasant. His spine is damaged, and it's likely he'll never walk again." "What a nightmare," Lucinda whispered. The nurse grinned wickedly and left the room. A few minutes later, a man in a police uniform came to Lucinda's room. "Lucinda," he said. "Yes, that's me. My name is Jacob. I want to ask you some questions about yesterday's incident. Do you mind?" "Of course, I'll answer all your questions." "Thank you. We spoke to your husband yesterday, but for the sake of completeness, we need to hear your side of the story. Do you remember exactly how the collision occurred?" "Yeah, we were driving home from the suburbs. At some point, Liam jerked the car to the left, and we were apparently in the oncoming lane. Then the impact happened. That's all I can tell you. Tell me, do you have a driver's license? Do you know how to drive?" "No. Why do you ask?" "They're just standard questions," the cop lied. In fact, he needed to understand what Liam had said was true and what was fiction. Her husband had tried to set her up by saying that she had been driving that night, that a car had driven into them and she had been trying to avoid a collision. But one thing he hadn't considered was that the police would be questioning his wife so soon. Liam thought he'd have time to tell her what to say and how to say it so no one would get in trouble. And what would happen to the injured guy, Liam didn't care at all. "Lucinda, did your husband ever drink and drive?" "No, it was a one-time thing. He used to always have a driver, but now he had to sack him because of financial difficulties, so Liam drove himself." "Thank you, Lucinda, for your answers. You've been very helpful. Tell me, Jacob, what's the threat to my husband?" "It depends on how the other party to the accident feels. But in any case, your husband will not be able to avoid criminal punishment because it was his fault that serious harm to health was caused. You can only use the services of a good lawyer. Perhaps he will help to reduce the term of punishment, although it is unlikely that he will succeed." "Why?" "Because the victim is the son of a deputy from a neighboring region. I think you understand that his father will do everything he can to maximize the punishment for the perpetrator." "I understand. Thank you," Lucinda replied quietly. The policeman left the room. There was no doubt in his mind now that Liam had been driving the car. "What a vile man. How can you shift your guilt onto another person, especially a woman?" Jacob quietly scolded his own wife. In his many years of service, he had never gotten used to human meanness and betrayal. Now he was ready to fight to make sure the man got what he deserved. The policeman dialed the number of his employee and told him to take Liam into custody, because yesterday, based on his testimony, the man was released on his own recognizance. Now he wouldn't be able to get out of this story so easily. Liam was working on his main problem when the doorbell rang. "Who the hell is that?" The man cursed. There was a police officer standing on the doorstep. "Liam? Well?" he replied dismissively. "You need to come with us to the station. You're suspected of committing a road traffic accident causing grievous bodily harm to a third party." "Why would I do that? I already told your superiors yesterday how it was." All questions to my wife, who was driving, but she's in no condition to answer your questions. "We're the injured party. We were hit by a crazy guy in a six." "Ask him." "We've already taken your wife's statement, and that, as you put it, crazy man now lies in intensive care, and it is not known whether he will live. And his father is unlikely to let you get away with it." "Wait," Liam was indignant. "When did my wife have time to talk to you? She's in the hospital and hasn't come to her senses yet, as far as I know." "You're wrong. She's perfectly capable of talking and testifying. So you better watch your words, otherwise your situation may be aggravated by perjury." "Bitch." Liam swore irritably. "Liam, let's not do this," politely asked one of the arresting police officers. "Don't you tell me what to do." "Okay, that's insulting an officer in the line of duty. Guys, let's cuff him and let's go." Liam tried to resist, but it was stupid, given his position and the strength of the police. Half an hour later, he was already being questioned by an investigator who informed him of his wife's statement and hinted at who the injured guy was. So the best thing the man could do now was to tell the truth and cooperate with the investigation. Liam had no choice but to comply, but he demanded a lawyer, refusing to speak without one. Thus began the investigation and trial. Meanwhile, Lucinda was on the mend. She was already able to walk around the hospital on her own. However, it was strange to her that her husband had not yet given any news about himself. The woman decided that he was just minding his own business, and now he was no longer interested in her. Lucinda was far from how cases were investigated, so she did not even suggest that Liam could be in the detention center. One day, she was walking down the corridor of the hospital and saw a young man being moved into one of the wards, followed by the policeman who had come to see her. Lucinda immediately realized that this was the victim Liam had driven his car into. Curiosity got the better of the woman, and she cautiously approached the room to overhear the conversation. "Kevin, the man responsible for the accident has been apprehended," said a voice that sounded familiar to Lucinda. "Your father will be here soon. He's already been informed that you've recovered." "Shit, that's the last thing I need is my father here. How am I going to explain all this to him?" "Kevin, you didn't have to do this. Steal someone else's car, get behind the wheel without a license, and go nowhere? Because my dad was a real pain in the ass. I wanted to get away from him, do something on my own." Kevin, you're gonna be handicapped for the rest of your life. Do you realize that?" Suddenly, Lucinda got a call from behind. "What are you doing here?" It was the nurse who was taking care of Lucinda. "You don't belong here. Or are you trying to bribe the victim? You're getting ready." "What are you talking about?" The woman was indignant. "Why should I bribe him? I'm only interested in his condition. You're all the same. Damn rich people. First you make a mess of things, and then you hide and think about who would bring money to whitewash yourselves. The guy's lucky to be alive, by the way. He'll probably be in a wheelchair from now on, and you and your husband will go on living in peace, knowing no troubles." Lucinda silently looked at the nurse with surprised eyes. Now she understood why she had been so rude to her all this time. "Look, I don't want to bribe anyone, and I don't have the money myself, and I don't know what my husband's plans are. He hasn't even come to see me once in all this time. Maybe he's out of town." Jacob came out of the victim's room. "What's going on here?" he asked angrily. "Oh, it's you, Lucinda. I've been meaning to talk to you. Can we go to your room?" "Of course," Lucinda answered quietly. When they entered, the policeman closed the door behind him and told Lucinda about her husband's affairs. "The investigation has already proved his guilt. The case has been submitted to the court, and the hearing will take place next week. Liam has no chance of staying free, and the victim's father will do his best to make sure he gets as much time as possible." As it turned out, Liam drove into the car of an 18-year-old boy who stole or simply arranged to borrow a car from an acquaintance to escape from his parents. His father doesn't have that much influence in this town, but nevertheless he has just as much money as Liam. Tears rolled down Lucinda's cheeks. She felt sorry for the injured boy. She was scared for Liam, even though she didn't love him anymore. He wasn't a stranger to her, and she was worried about him. And most importantly, it was not clear what she should do now, how to live with this burden. Lucinda woke up from an incomprehensible rumble. When she opened her eyes, she saw an unfamiliar man in an expensive suit and a robe thrown over his shoulders. "You're asleep, bitch. You murdered my son, and now you're just lying there. I'll make your life a living hell. You and your husband will go to hard labor for the rest of your life. Who are you and what do you want?" Lucinda asked fearfully, though she had already guessed who her visitor was. "I am your nightmare from now on and for the rest of your life." Lucinda sat up on the bed, sleep finally receded. She looked at the man carefully. "Stop screaming. I can understand your condition and sincerely sympathize with you. But this grief does not give you any right to behave like this with a stranger, especially without knowing all the details of what happened. You talk to me here. I'm not going to leave you like this. I said it all." After that, the man turned around and left the room, slamming the door loudly. Lucinda remained sitting motionless. She could not even imagine what to expect from this man. After sitting like that for about half an hour, the woman decided to go check on Kevin, the guy who had been injured in the accident. She approached his room and knocked gently. No one answered. Then Lucinda opened the door. "May I come in?" the woman asked. There was still no answer. Then the woman entered the room. Kevin was lying on the bed, looking up at the ceiling. "Hi," Lucinda said. "Hello. Who the hell are you?" Kevin asked back. "My name is Lucinda. I was a passenger in the car that hit you." "Oh, what did you want? Is this about my father? You think I sicked him on you? Well, you're wrong. I don't blame you for anything. Neither you nor your husband. It's my own fault. I shouldn't have started all this. I'd be at home now, warm, cozy, fed, and happy. No, I wanted my freedom. I'm really sorry about what happened. I know it sounds stupid, and it won't make things right, but I'm sorry." Kevin looked at Lucinda in surprise. "Forgive you for what? It's not like you had anything to do with it. You were a passenger, and I was hit by the driver, your husband, I understand." "Yes, my husband. Only he's never gonna admit he's to blame in his life. He'll blame everyone around him but him, and I don't think he cares about anyone else but himself. Maybe now he'll realize something." "You say that like you're glad he's in trouble." It was hard for Lucinda to admit it, but she did feel a certain amount of joy that Liam might get a real sentence. "Maybe you're right," Lucinda sighed. "That way I'd have at least a chance to get away and divorce him. Wasn't there any way to do it without that?" "Apparently not," the woman replied sadly. "He's terribly possessive. Next to him I felt like a prisoner and I could not leave. He promised me such problems, no worse than your father. So my sacrifice wasn't in vain." Kevin tried to smile. "Did my father threaten you?" "Yeah, he came by today. Yelling, cursing. Never mind. I didn't come to you to complain or ask you to save me from him. I'm an adult. I have to deal with my own problems. I'm sorry again. I'm really sorry about what happened. You're a good person." "Thanks, Kevin. Where were you going in such a hurry? Would you mind telling me?" "I'll tell you. I wanted to start my own life. I guess, like you, I wanted to be free of my parents' custody. I was tired of being pushed around. Constant control. My father was always forcing me to study. He paid for me to go to law school. That's not my thing. I wanted to study music. I even had a band with some guys, but my parents made me give it all up, saying I wouldn't get anywhere with my music. So I decided to run away. I saved up some money, borrowed a friend's car, got in and drove off." Lucinda couldn't hold back her tears. She felt so sorry for this guy, who had such grandiose dreams, such a will to achieve them, determination. And now, because of her husband, he lost everything. Now Kevin's whole life is about lying in bed. He's unlikely to have a wife and children. He won't be able to play his favorite guitar anymore. He's not even going to be the lawyer his parents wanted him to be. "Lucinda, don't cry. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just what someone upstairs wanted, and I'll talk to your father. I promise you, he won't hurt you." "Thank you, Kevin," Lucinda said gratefully. She went back to her room. The woman felt a little better. The next few days were completely uneventful. She socialized with Kevin. The guy turned out to be a very developed and interesting conversationalist. Lucinda was surprised that in her 32 years, she could so easily and freely communicate with an 18-year-old guy. Kevin's father didn't show up again. He was too busy with Liam's lawsuit. Meanwhile, Lucinda was getting ready to be discharged with a lot of important things ahead of her. Lucinda couldn't leave the hospital without saying goodbye to Kevin. The evening before the day of discharge, she went to his room as usual. They talked a lot about life, their families, their dreams. "Kevin, what happened to your mom? Why did your dad come to see you alone and I never saw her?" "I don't have a mom," the kid simply answered. "What do you mean?" Lucinda was surprised. "It's like this. When I was 5 years old, she left my father for some richer man 20 years older than her. She hasn't even been interested in me or my life since." Dad, of course, didn't grieve about it for long. To everyone's misfortune, in 6 months he brought into the house a young long-legged blonde and soon married her. Naturally, she doesn't want my father or me. She's interested in Daddy's money and connections, but apparently he's fine with that. That's why she's been living with us all these years. I can't say we have a warm relationship. It's more like neighbors. "What a hard fate you've had," Lucinda said sympathetically. "It's okay. I'd accepted it. I guess it's more interesting than living on my own. At least I've seen something in my short life." "Don't say that. You've got so much more to see." "What's there to see when you're lying in bed?" "Kevin, I mean, we can try to do something. There are cases where people have recovered from injuries like this. And your father's got money. I think he'll spare no expense in your recovery." "Lucinda, do you believe that?" "I do," the woman answered firmly. "You believe it? Okay, thank you. Kevin, I actually came to tell you that I'm being discharged tomorrow, and I won't be seeing you here anymore, and I don't know if I'll ever see you again. I want to get away from all of this. Divorce Liam, sell the apartment, buy a train ticket, and go somewhere where no one will find me. But I'm sorry to leave you. I've grown so attached to you these days. You're a very nice guy, really. But your father won't approve of us hanging out. I'll leave you my number anyway. If you want, you can call me any time of the day or night. I'll always be ready to listen to you. I'm sorry to break up with you too," Kevin replied quietly as if embarrassed. "If we had met under different circumstances, I would definitely have asked you to go out with me." Kevin lowered his eyes in embarrassment. He couldn't tell Lucinda directly how he felt for fear of being rejected. But during these days that they had known each other, the guy had fallen in love with her up to his ears. "Kevin, what are you talking about and what does that have to do with anything? I'm 14 years older than you. We'd make a great couple. You're very nice and you're bound to meet a girl worthy of you and age appropriate. Why would you want a grown-up aunt with a lot of problems and a bad marriage?" Lucinda tried to joke. "You're not an aunt." Kevin was indignant. "I'm going to go. It's getting late. Call me." Lucinda went back to her room. She lay down on the bed and thought about the words Kevin had said to her. She was worried that this nice guy was so attached to her and harbored false feelings. Lucinda realized the absurdity of the situation. "Okay," the woman said aloud. "I'll leave. He'll forget me and everything will be fine. His father is a rich man with connections. He'll probably be able to help his son get back on his feet and everything will be fine." The next day, Lucinda checked out and went home. The first thing she needed to do was to find out how Liam was doing, but how to do that the woman didn't understand yet. She didn't have the contacts of the policemen who had come to see her, and she didn't know who else to call. Lucinda finally found the number of their district police officer on the internet, and after an hour of negotiating and calling various authorities, she was given the number of Jacob, who was handling the case. She dialed the number and heard a familiar voice. "Senior Lieutenant, speaking." "Hello, my name is Lucinda. You were in charge of my husband Liam's case." "Yes, I understand what you wanted. I wanted to know how he was doing, how the trial ended. Maybe I'm in the wrong place, but I don't know who I can get information from. But he's my husband. I want to know how he's doing. He was sentenced to 1.5 years in prison with a fine. He was lucky that the victim survived and his father could not seriously influence the court's decision. If you want to meet him, come to the detention center." Jacob gave Lucinda the address and said goodbye. The woman wondered whether she should see her husband after all that had happened or whether she should run away. Lucinda was confused. On the one hand, she realized that the best thing to do was to run away now without saying anything to Liam. On the other hand, she felt sorry for her husband because they were close to him and had a family life, albeit not a long one. In the end, the woman decided that she should meet with Liam, if only to inform him of the divorce. Maybe the situation had taught him something, Lucinda reasoned. Maybe he'd learned that you can't be so stubborn and selfish. Then there's a chance for reconciliation in this family. Everyone deserves a second chance. With these thoughts, Lucinda changed her clothes, cleaned herself up, and went to the address. Once there, the woman saw a gray, gluey building with bars on the windows behind a high fence with barbed wire. At the gate stood 2 sentries. Lucinda walked past them, feeling an inexplicable fear and panic inspired by the place. At the entrance, she was met by the officer on duty. "Hello, who are you here to see?" he asked. "Good afternoon. I was told I could meet my husband. He was recently convicted and brought to you. Your husband's name and surname, and your identification, please." "Liam," Lucinda replied, holding out her passport to the officer on duty. "Have a seat. I'll find out everything now." The officer on duty called someone on the phone, asked something, and after a couple of minutes he turned to Lucinda. "Follow me." He led the woman into a special room for dating. There was a table and 2 chairs opposite each other. "Have a seat. Your husband will be right with you." Lucinda sat down on one of the chairs. She noticed at once that it was terribly uncomfortable, apparently on purpose, so that people did not stay here for long. 5 minutes later, Liam entered the room. He looked wrinkled, his face covered in stubble, his hair disheveled, and there were bruises under his eyes, indicating that he'd had a lot of sleep. "Hi," Lucinda said quietly. "How are you?" "Don't you see?" Liam replied with a grin. "I'm resting here like a sanatorium." "Liam, don't be sarcastic. I don't want to hurt you." "Yeah?" The man shouted indignantly. "And who told the cops that it was me who drove and hit that puppy and drunk? Wasn't it you, dear wife?" "What did I say wrong?" Lucinda was surprised. "They came and asked me how it was, so I told them." "Then you think with your empty head that you should have asked me first what you could and couldn't say. I should have told them you were driving. We both be home right now, and we both be out of trouble. And you ratted me out, you bitch." "Liam, stop it. How dare you accuse me of something? I didn't put you behind the wheel like that. That poor guy was lucky to be alive. You ruined his life. I don't care about that guy. I care about my own life. And it's going downhill right now. So you listen to me. You're gonna go home now. Find Jason's phone number in my address book. Call him and describe the situation. Then you're gonna do whatever he says to get me out of here. You got it? Why didn't you call him yourself?" "I didn't have time. I didn't think it would happen so fast. Do you understand what you have to do? I'm asking you." "I'm not helping you, Liam. I don't know how I ever married such a monster. You don't see anyone but yourself. You don't need anyone. I'm filing for divorce and you can't stop me. Just try it. I'll pull you out of the ground. You'll owe me for the rest of your life for all the money I spent on you. And also," Liam didn't get a chance to finish because a policeman came into the room. "Your date is over. Citizen out. You get up. Let's go back to your cell." "You know what I mean," Liam growled angrily. Lucinda quickly grabbed her bag and ran out of the building. She regretted that she had even decided to go to this meeting with her husband. What a tyrant he'd been. He was still a tyrant. Maybe even worse. Lucinda walked slowly toward the bus stop, thinking about what to do next. Lucinda's first order of business was to file for divorce from Liam. Now she had no doubt that this man would never change and living next to him would be hell. Lucinda didn't want to stay in his house either, so after packing her things and accumulated money, the woman left here for good, returning to her premarital apartment. Lucinda decided that the most correct course of action would be to file for divorce through the courts. She filed a statement of claim and waited for the result. She was immediately warned that such cases usually take 1 to 3 months. After that, Lucinda began to look for a buyer for her apartment. The woman wanted to get rid of everything that kept her here, in this city, to escape once and for all. So she asked the minimum price for her place, just to sell it faster. She was lucky. A young man named John was looking for a suitable apartment in the neighborhood to start a family. He was completely satisfied with Lucinda's price offer, and the apartment itself was a great option. All that was left was to wait for a reply from the bank, which had to approve John's mortgage. This also required about a month. The woman was lucky. The judge divorced her in Lyme at the first meeting, which was held 3 weeks after the application was filed. Almost immediately after that, the bank approved John's mortgage, and he and Lucinda signed a contract of sale of the apartment. There was nothing to keep her here now. After gathering the most necessary things, Lucinda went to the train station. The woman decided that she wanted to start a new life with a clean slate, so she would not take a lot of things with her, because she had enough money to provide herself with everything she needed. Half an hour later, Lucinda stood in front of the ticket booths at the station and chose a direction. She knew for sure that she wouldn't go to a big city, but rather to a place where Lyme wouldn't even think of looking for her, to some small, cozy town. Chicago was the choice. The train was leaving in 3 hours. After the choice was made and the tickets were in the woman's hands, Lucinda could relax a little. The woman deposited her suitcase in the luggage room and decided to take a little walk around the city to see it for what she thought would be the last time. There was a small park not far from the train station. Lucinda decided to go there. She bought a cup of ice cream and sat down on a bench. Suddenly, her cell phone rang. The call was from an unknown number. The woman was afraid to answer it at first. 2 disturbing thoughts popped into her head at once. It was someone calling at Lyme's request, who had heard about the divorce, or Kevin's father, whose threats Lucinda hadn't forgotten about, even though he hadn't shown himself all this time. Lucinda gingerly pressed the answer button. "Hello," the woman said in a shaky voice. "Hi, it's me. Recognize me?" "Kevin," Lucinda clarified and exhaled with relief. "Yeah, I thought you said I could call you about anything." "Of course you can. I thought you'd call a lot sooner." I'm sorry. I didn't have time. I was raising my dad." The guy laughed. "I'm glad you're in a good mood. How are you?" "I'm finally being discharged from that awful hospital." "That's great news, Kevin. I'm happy for you." "They also said I have a chance at recovery, but I have to fly to Germany for that, so I'm flying out tomorrow." "That's great, Kevin. I told you there was more to come." "Yeah, how's it going with you? Divorced your husband?" "Divorced?" Lucinda sighed. "I sold my apartment and now I'm sitting by the train station waiting for my train." "How far are you going?" "Yeah, not far, Chicago." "Wow, why did you choose this village to live in?" "Don't be like that, Kevin. It's a nice town, on the Michigan shore, nice and green. I've always wanted to live by the lake, and here, I don't have to be afraid of lion. I don't think he'd think to look for me there." "Good then. It's always nice when dreams come true. Are you gonna invite me to the housewarming party?" "I will. I just need to buy a place to live, get a job, and do all the things that life in a new place requires." "Well, I can't really go right now either. You know, it's a long way to Germany, and it's gonna take a while to recover, so don't expect it before 6 months." "That's a deal. Good luck, Kevin." "Thanks, Lucinda. You too." After talking to Kevin, the woman felt a little calmer. She believed that the operation would help him get back on his feet and he would be able to live a full life. Lucinda herself had a new life ahead of her, where there would be no more room for people like her husband. Lucinda stepped off the train, the bright summer sun hitting her eyes. The woman looked around. Everything was strange and unfamiliar. While Lucinda was on the road, she thought about how to get settled in her new place. The woman managed to look at several advertisements for apartments. Her money was enough to buy a 1-bedroom and still have some money left for living. Lucinda decided to rent a bed in a hostel while she searched for a suitable option. Of course, she could afford a good hotel room, but Lucinda decided that it would be best to save as much money as possible and not spend it on any excesses. There was no telling how the job situation would turn out or how long it would take to find a place to stay. To her surprise, the room was very clean and spacious. There were not many guests, so Lucinda's neighbors were only 2 female students traveling around the city. Lucinda did not dare to deal with the purchase of the apartment herself, so she turned to a real estate agency. She described her wishes and waited for a suitable option. In the end, 3 days later, The realtor called Lucinda and offered several apartments that were for sale almost in the center of the city at a very attractive price. The woman decided to look at each of them. The first apartment was in an old house on the first floor. According to the seller, this apartment was inherited by his grandmother about a year ago. This immediately scared Lucinda away. She did not want to live in an apartment where someone had recently died. The second apartment was in a newer building with a good repair, but even there she felt uncomfortable, though she couldn't explain why. The last option was located on the 8th floor of a 9-story building. It had a beautiful view of the Volga. Lucinda immediately fell in love with this apartment. Despite the fact that it was a little smaller than the previous options, she felt at home in it. Everything was good here. A beautiful view from the window, a convenient layout, modern repairs. Lucinda decided that it was possible to stop at this option. The realtor promised to prepare a sales contract, and the next week Lucinda would be able to move into her new apartment. All this time, Lucinda corresponded with Kevin. He told her about Germany, how nice and beautiful it was. Even from the window of the hospital where he was lying, he had a beautiful view of the architecture of the city. They were preparing him for surgery, collecting all the necessary tests. In turn, Lucinda shared with him her impressions of her new place of residence. She bragged about her future apartment as well. Kevin praised her choice and promised to come and visit her immediately after her return to Russia. The deal to buy the apartment was successful. Gradually, Lucinda bought everything she needed for her new home. Now it was possible to look for a job. The difficulty was that Lucinda had not worked for a long time, so all her previous work experience was not so important to employers. The woman went on interviews, but there were no results. She was either offered too small a salary with irregular working hours or promised to call back, and that was the end of it. After 2 months, she was lucky. A large company from another city was opening a branch in Chicago and was recruiting new employees for the team. Lucinda responded to one of these vacancies, and after an interview, she was offered a good position with a decent salary. So went the usual work routine. Meanwhile, Kevin underwent surgery. It was a success. Now the guy was engaged in recovery procedures. He could already sit freely and tried to stand on his feet. There was no talk of full-fledged movement yet, but doctors gave positive forecasts, promising that in 6 months, Kevin would be able to walk without assistance. His father did not spare any money for his son's recovery, and it was paying off. The time flew by very quickly. Lucinda settled into her new place. She liked her new life. The woman had new interesting acquaintances, even began to improve her personal life. One evening after work, she went to her favorite pastry shop. Lucinda wanted to take her favorite cake to celebrate the successful completion of a project at work. But it was the last one, and some man asked him to give up this cake for his favorite daughter, who won a sports competition today and wants this cake as a present. Lucinda couldn't help but give in to the child, and the man, a little embarrassed, asked about Lucinda's plans for the evening. They struck up a conversation. The man's name was Steve. It turned out that he was raising his daughter all alone, his wife having died in a plane crash a few years ago. He ended up inviting Lucinda to join them for a celebration. It was a completely unexpected offer for the woman, but she accepted. She didn't realize how she had agreed so quickly, but there must have been something about this man that was so appealing and special. It was the beginning of their relationship. Steve's daughter also quickly became friends with Lucinda. She was already old enough to realize that Daddy could not live all this life alone with memories of his mother. Therefore, the girl did not interfere with their relationship. It seemed that life got better, and now Lucinda has a calm and bright future ahead of her. But not always in life everything happens exactly as it is desired. Lion was not released until the winter of the following year. The weather outside was gray and snowless. The man shivered. He hadn't been able to get out of prison early, no matter how hard he tried. Kevin's father had done a good job of keeping Liam there for his entire sentence. During the time the man spent incarcerated, many changes took place. The partner he had made a deal with before going to prison turned out to be a corrupt man and canceled all contracts at the first opportunity. And he did it in such a way that Liam was left not just without money, but he was a lot of debts from third-party organizations. In order to cover everything, the man had to sell his house, car, and other property. The money was barely enough. After that, Liam was left literally on the street. All former friends turned away from him because no one wanted to have problems with the law. Liam had nowhere to go. In all his troubles, of course, he blamed Lucinda. After all, in the man's opinion, everything happened because of her. If she hadn't been such a fool then, they'd both be sitting on the ocean somewhere now, enjoying their paradisiacal lives. Liam couldn't accept that, so he decided to visit his ex-wife. He figured she couldn't have traveled far and was now living in her old apartment. Without difficulty remembering the address, the man went there, but he was not opened. A woman shouted through the door that she was not Lucinda and did not live there. Liam knocked for a long time, demanding to be let in, but to no avail. After a while, the police arrived with a man. Together they managed to take Liam to the street, where he told them that his ex-wife lived in the apartment, who had now disappeared and had not given any news about her. Nevertheless, the police had to take the man to the station and make a report on the offense. At the station, Liam once again talked about his problem. He even had the idea of filing a missing persons report for his wife. But he was rebuffed in return, as Lucinda is nobody to him at the moment, and it is quite possible that she deliberately made sure that Liam would not find her. Liam's behavior, given that he was only recently released from prison, did not go unpunished. He was given a 5-day jail sentence. At first, they wanted to give him the full sentence, but they decided that the man was having too much trouble as it was. During the time Liam spent in the cell, he figured out a way to find Lucinda. Since he couldn't find her in a good way, the man decided to file a report that his ex-wife had run away, taking with her a rather serious amount of money from the safe, and the evidence was not his concern. Even if he failed to accuse Lucinda of theft, he would still know where she was, and he could take revenge on her for all his troubles. So Liam did just that. When he was released once again, he first filed a report on the disappearance of a large sum of money and said that no one but his ex-wife could have taken it. The report was accepted and an investigation began. After that, Liam's main problem was the lack of housing. Of course, he had gotten used to inconveniences for the last year and a half, but he could not live on the street in winter or wander around train stations. He had to get a job as a janitor because he could not get any other job with such a past. The pay was pennies, but it was stable. He was also given a small van to live in. Liam was willing to put up with the inconvenience, knowing that the time would come and his ex-wife would be held accountable. In the meantime, the police had begun processing Liam's application. Coincidentally, his case had fallen to the very officer who had once put the man behind bars. Jacob was immediately drawn to the familiar combination of surnames and first names of the defendants, but he couldn't remember them. Too many people he'd had to deal with, and it was impossible to remember each one. Lucinda stood at the airport waiting for her guest. Kevin had called her the night before and told her that he had recently returned from Germany and was eager to meet her. The woman immediately invited him to her house because she had long ago promised to invite him to a housewarming party. The airplane arrived on schedule. Lucinda was very worried. "Wow," Lucinda marveled. "You're walking so well already. I've been working very hard to recover, and it's all thanks to you." "Why thanks to me?" the woman asked in surprise. "Who told me that everything would be all right and life would return to normal?" Kevin laughed. "I'm glad I was able to help you overcome these difficulties. Come on, I'll show you my apartment and then the city." They got into Lucinda's car, which she had recently bought on credit. "Wow," Kevin marveled. "You've already learned to drive." "I have. I have to travel a lot for work, and public transportation is not the most convenient option." "And now how did you manage to get away from work? I mean, it's the middle of the day, right? You won't have any problems because of me." "I took a few days vacation, so I'm completely at your disposal," Lucinda smiled. They reached the apartment. Kevin immediately appreciated the accommodations. She had furnished it very nicely, and there was nothing superfluous. The woman fed her guest lunch, after which they went for a walk around the city. Lucinda took Kevin to her favorite places, told him some stories about the city, which she had learned during her stay in Chicago. After a long walk, the woman suggested her guests to go to a cafe and celebrate their meeting. Kevin gladly agreed. He was tired and hungry during the walk, and he needed an excuse to confess something to Lucinda. As they sat at a table in a cozy cafe, Lucinda told Kevin that she wanted him to meet someone. She had invited Steve and his daughter to this evening so that they could all spend time together. "I thought it would be just the two of us," Kevin said with ill-concealed disappointment. "I think you'll like my friends." Lucinda glanced at the man and the girl who had entered the cafe. As Steve and Nancy approached the table, Lucinda introduced them to each other. "Meet my very good friend, comrade, and just a wonderful guy, Kevin. And this is my future husband, Steve, and his daughter, Xenia." "What husband?" Kevin was outraged. "Lucinda, how could you do this to me?" "Kevin, wait. How could I do this to you? There's too much age difference between you two. You're young, you're hot-blooded, adventurous, and unexplored. And she's got a lot going on in her life. She wants a quiet life. And what makes you think I can't give her that quiet life?" Kevin asked in a calmer voice. "Because I was a young guy in my 20s, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to want to try everything. I even understand your attraction to an older woman, but it'll pass quickly. Trust my experience." "I want to live my experience," Kevin snapped at me. "You shouldn't say that. Lucinda is very nice to you. She's always spoken very warmly of you, but she sees you more as a friend, in some ways even as a son, so she can't share your feelings for her." "What am I supposed to do now? I flew all the way out here to propose, even bought a ring. I wanted to stay here with her. But now I see that I'm not here anymore. Where am I supposed to go?" "Kevin, you need to talk to Lucinda. You two need to work this out together. It'll make you and her feel better. I can't see her. She betrayed me. And you think you're worthy of a grown woman? You sound like a teenager in transition. My advice to you is to find the courage to talk to Lucinda. She's very worried about you. And you know what? If she wants to stay with you after that conversation, I'll back off and stay out of your way. But you have to talk to her yourself." "I will. Can you call her?" "My phone's at the cafe. I don't want to go back there. I'll wait for her at the apartment. I want to talk to her one-on-one." "No problem. Do you need a ride?" "No need. It's not that far, is it? If I remember correctly, it's about a 15-minute walk." "Thank you." After this conversation, Kevin went to Lucinda's house and Steve went back to the cafe. On the way, he called Lucinda and relayed the gist of the conversation. The woman replied that she would go home so that Kevin wouldn't arrive before her and wait under the door. Little wonder what might happen to him in a strange town. She offered to take Nancy with her, but Steve said to let his daughter stay at the cafe and wait for him. After all, Lucinda needed to talk to Kevin without strangers. The woman quickly got into her car and was home in 5 minutes. Kevin wasn't there yet. He didn't show up after 10 minutes or 20. Lucinda got worried and started calling Steve to find out what road the guy took and where to look for him. "Steve, how did he go? Through town or along the waterfront?" "I think it was the waterfront." "Okay, Lucinda, don't panic. Maybe he just got a little lost. You've given him the address. If he thinks of asking people, it's not too late. They should be able to help him. If he doesn't show up in half an hour, we'll go looking for him." "Steve, I can't just sit here and wait. It's winter outside." Then the doorbell rang. Lucinda asked Steve to stay on until she checked to see who was there. The woman looked through the peephole and Kevin was standing outside the door. "Steve, he's here," the woman said as she opened the door locks. "It's okay. Thank you for your help," thanked Lucinda and passed out. When she finally opened the door, the pungent odor of alcohol hit her nose. "Kevin," exclaimed the woman, "where have you been? What happened?" The guy didn't answer anything. He stepped over the threshold of the house, slammed the door, and passionately kissed Lucinda right on the lips. It seemed like an eternity to Lucinda before Kevin pulled away from her lips. "What are you doing?" Lucinda was outraged, pushing the boy away from her. "I love you. Don't you understand that? I want you all to myself. Lucinda, Lucinda, Lucinda. I'm gonna make you the happiest woman on the planet. I've spent so long planning to meet you, to impress you with how I overcame all the odds, how I learned to walk again. And it's all for you. Why don't you want to give yourself to me? What are you afraid of? I can see that you care about me too." "Stop it. Kevin, stop it. You're in no condition to be discussing this right now." Lucinda was shaking with fear, afraid that Kevin might do something stupid that he would regret. Lucinda tried to speak as softly as possible. "And tomorrow morning you'll wake up and we'll talk about it." No, I want you to give me an answer right here, right now. Okay, fine. Let's just move to the room and talk about it there anyway. Okay. Kevin reluctantly agreed. That's good. Go sit down and I'll go make us some coffee. You'll be fine. Kevin waved his hand and walked back into the apartment, and Lucinda gave a faint sigh of relief. She still had her cell phone in her hand. Going into the kitchen, the woman quickly typed a message to Steve. Come to my place right away. It didn't take long for a reply. Lucinda quickly ran her eyes over the text. On my way out, I'll be there in 20 minutes. What's wrong? The woman decided not to reply to the message. She busied herself with making coffee. There was no telling what else might cross Kevin's mind. 10 minutes later, Lucinda cautiously exited the kitchen and walked quietly into the room. Kevin was sleeping peacefully, stretched out on the couch. The woman also quietly walked back into the kitchen. Now she could answer Steve quietly. It's okay. I'll tell you when you get here. Just don't ring the bell. After another 10 minutes, there was a gentle knock on the door. It was Steve. He looked worried. Lucinda quietly opened the door and escorted the man into the kitchen, where she told him what had happened. Did he hurt you? The man asked angrily. No, he didn't. It's okay. I told you. He just wanted to tell me how he felt and he kissed me. That's all he did. Lucinda, don't cover for him. I can understand that. I can even accept your friendship. But I don't want you to be miserable because of him. Steve, really? It's okay. Can you stay with me tonight? Yeah, I'll just call Nancy now and let her know. Lucinda set up the cot she prepared especially for Kevin's arrival, and she and Steve went to bed. The man woke up early in the morning when everyone else was still asleep. He carefully got up from his bunk so as not to wake Lucinda and made his way to the bathroom. When he returned to the kitchen, the woman was already preparing breakfast. He gently hugged her from behind and kissed her cheek. I can't wait for mornings like this to become a regular occurrence, Steve said with a smile. Me too, Lucinda said, although I'd rather sleep in a regular bed. They ate breakfast and Steve left for work. Are you sure you can manage without me? Steve asked anxiously. Should I stay up late and wait for Kevin to wake up? No, that's okay. He won't hurt me, especially sober. We should talk to him alone after all. All right, fine. Call me if you need anything. Steve left for work and Lucinda waited for her guest to wake up. Kevin didn't wake up until 11 o'clock. His head hurt terribly and his mouth was all dry. He got up and walked unsteadily to the kitchen, where Lucinda was sitting and thinking about something, staring out the window. Hi, Kevin said quietly. Lucinda flinched in surprise and looked at him. Hello, she said sternly. Lucinda, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. Don't, Kevin. I understand perfectly well. Let's just please close the subject once and for all. Sit down. I'll pour you some coffee. Kevin obediently sat down in the chair, and Lucinda continued. I want to explain to you once again that you are dear to me as a friend. I am worried about you and always have been, probably because I feel guilty about what happened to you. But I never considered you as my life partner. You're very young, and you have your whole life ahead of you. You can finally realize your dream, become a musician, travel the world. But for that, you need another young and ambitious companion. I'm not cut out for that. I'd like you to stay in my life, but if you can't change your attitude towards me, then we better forget about each other once and for all. It's best for everyone. I hear you, Kevin said after a short pause. Maybe we really should stop talking for a while. I'll leave tonight, and I won't bother you again. At least not for a while. Kevin drank his coffee, packed his things, and headed for the airport. Lucinda offered him a ride, but he turned out. I'm sorry for everything. Be happy, said Kevin to Lucinda one last time. They hugged and the guy left her apartment and Lucinda was left alone with her thoughts. She was sorry to break up their peculiar friendship with Kevin, but it was the right thing to do, at least for now. Lucinda had pretty much calmed down by now after the story with Kevin. At first, she had been worried about what had happened, blaming herself for not being able to recognize the guy's feelings for her and for not explaining the impossibility of a love affair between them very clearly. Then Lucinda was angry at Kevin for not wanting to understand the simple truth that, in a woman's opinion, a difference of 14 years between a man and a woman is not acceptable for a happy marriage, especially if the woman is older. And now Lucinda had calmed down. She no longer blamed herself or Kevin. Everything had been resolved more or less well, so it was not worth dwelling on it, Lucinda decided. During this period, the woman often met with Steve, who was always trying to distract her from sad thoughts. This also played a part, and everything seemed to be back to normal, but suddenly there was a new problem. One afternoon, when Lucinda was working on a project, a call from an unknown number popped up on her cell phone. Lucinda didn't see anything suspicious about it. She often received calls from customers and colleagues from other branches, so the woman calmly answered the call. "Lucinda?" The caller clarified. "Yes, it's me. It's Senior Lieutenant Chisholm from Police Station 4. Could you come down here today?" "What's the matter?" Lucinda asked anxiously. "You are a person of interest in a case. We need your testimony." "What case?" "Lucinda, I can't tell you everything over the phone right now. Come down to the station and we'll talk about it." "Okay. Cell phone rings, I'll be there. What time can I do it?" 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock in room 102. "Okay, I'll be there." "Thank you, Lucinda. We'll be waiting for you." Lucinda disconnected the call and began to wonder what this case could be and why the police were suddenly interested in her. The firm's affairs were clean, she was sure of that. She had done nothing illegal. After a while, an unpleasant conjecture visited her thoughts. She thought that it was her ex-husband who decided to challenge his imprisonment and pin all the blame on her. It was not for nothing that he had threatened her then, and according to the time limit, he was about to be released from prison. Lucinda did not say at work that she was summoned to the police. She just pretended that, as usual, she went on company business. On the way to the police station, she called Steve and told him about today's call and her suspicions. The man asked her to keep him informed about everything that was going on and, most importantly, not to panic early. The woman easily found the right office and knocked on the door. "Come in," she heard from behind the door. "Hello, I got a call today asking me to come in on a case." "Lucinda?" said the owner of the office. "Yes," Lucinda answered briefly. "Please have a seat. I'm the one who called you. My name is Tony." Lucinda carefully sat down on the chair opposite the policeman and looked at him with a questioning look. "Tell me, please, how long have you lived in Chicago?" The officer began his interrogation. "About 2 years. Wait a minute. Maybe I should get a lawyer. I don't want any trouble, and I don't want you to accuse me of anything when I can't defend myself." Lucinda chose a defensive position. "Lucinda, you can certainly have a lawyer, but I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just getting some details." Lucinda did not answer anything. She silently looked at her interlocutor. "Can we continue?" he clarified. "Yes, but if I don't like something, I can refuse to answer your questions." "Of course you can, but I strongly advise you to tell me the truth. It's in your own interest." "All right, I understand. Let's continue. Where do you live?" "In my apartment, which I bought when I got to Chicago." "And how did you buy the apartment?" "I sold my apartment in another city and used the money to buy a place here." "Can you document that?" "Of course. My documents are in order, but I don't carry them with me, so I keep them at home." "And your car was purchased with what funds?" "It was bought on credit. I have the paperwork to prove it too, and I have it at home." "Lucinda, please don't take this personally. I'm not going to accuse you of anything. I'm just trying to get the whole picture. Then maybe you can tell me what's going on and what happened. Tell me, do you know Liam?" Lucinda flinched at the name of her ex-husband. She knew it was him, but she didn't know what he was up to yet. "It's my ex-husband," Lucinda replied in a trembling voice. "The thing is, a few days ago, we received a request from your hometown. Liam claims that a large sum of money has gone missing from his safe, and he named you as the only suspect since no one else was in his house during his absence." "But that's nonsense," Lucinda said indignantly. "I ran away from this house as soon as he was put in jail. I hardly even took my things." "Lucinda, please calm down. We're gonna figure this out. You're not facing any charges yet. To be honest, he couldn't provide any evidence that anyone else was in the house or that the money was stolen at all. It's all in his own words, but we're obliged to check it out. Thank you for your cooperation. Please stay in touch. I don't want to restrict your freedom in any way, so I just ask you not to leave the city, especially if you are not involved. You have nothing to fear." After that, Tony said goodbye to Lucinda, and the woman left the station. She felt very bad. Liam was sitting in Jacob's office, who had called him in for more information after the results of his conversation with Lucinda had come back from Chicago. Liam had a nasty smile on his face. He felt that his plan had worked and the police had found Lucinda. Now it was just a matter of finding her. We needed to get his ex-wife's phone number, or better yet, her address. We've spoken to your wife, Liam, and she claims she had nothing to do with your money, and we have no reason not to trust her. Of course she has nothing to do with it. Liam replied mockingly. Did you think she'd just confess to you right away? I stole all the money from my husband, and now I'm living on my own while he's rotting away in his shitty job. Liam, I'm going to have to ask you to watch your language. Why don't we have a straight talk? I wonder what it's about. You never forgave your wife for not covering for you in the accident case, and now you want her to suffer too. Isn't that right? Jacob spent a long time trying to remember why this man looked so familiar. He checked the database, pulled up old cases, and it all came back to him. This was the man who caused a drunken accident, almost taking a young man's life, and then wanted to frame his wife. What a load of crap. Liam was outraged. I need her. I just need her to give me back what she stole from me. You see, Liam, the thing is, Jacob began to speak in a very quiet voice. You couldn't give us any proof that you had the money at all, and even less that your ex-wife could be involved in this case. Come on, there was no theft, was there? Can I at least see the answers to the questions about my money? Liam asked irritably. No, I can't give you that information. It is confidential and has no value to you. How dare you? Liam said with feigned emotion and immediately clutched his heart. Can I at least ask you for some water? He added quietly, mimicking a painful grimace. Liam realized that he was acting like a pussycat in a cheap soap opera, but he was still acting. Jacob grudgingly got up from his seat and walked out into the hallway to the water cooler. Even though the distance from the office to the water cooler wasn't very far, it was enough time for Liam to find the information he needed in his file on the desk. Among the other papers was a sheet of Lucinda's data. He quickly snapped a picture of them on his cell phone and slammed the folder shut, putting it back where it belonged. Jacob returned at the same second. Here you go. The man held out a glass of water. Thank you, Liam said, and drank the water in one gulp. You know, you're right. I was just trying to get back at my wife for my broken fate. You're the one who broke it. You don't have to continue your investigation. I don't care. Let him go to hell with the money. Jacob wanted to say something, but Liam had already left his office. The man walked outside and headed for his gatehouse with a triumphant look on his face. I told you couldn't hide from me, Liam muttered under his breath. Wait for me to visit, sweetheart. I'll see you soon. After that, the man packed his modest belongings, took out the money he'd saved lately, and headed for the airport. He didn't plan to go back. There was nothing to keep him in this city anymore. He wanted to get to his ex-wife as soon as possible, so he wasn't going to waste time on the train, especially since the ticket price for these modes of transportation didn't differ much. Liam bought a ticket for the nearest flight, and in 3 hours he was already sitting on the plane, anticipating his meeting with Lucinda. It was a cold February evening outside. Lucinda was at home and was going to meet Steve. He had invited her to the theater for the opening night of a play. The man was supposed to pick Lucinda up in half an hour. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. You're early, Lucinda said, opening the door, but when she saw Liam on the threshold, she was startled. You? Were you expecting someone else, my dear? Liam pushed Lucinda roughly into the apartment, then walked in and slammed the door behind him. What are you doing here? Lucinda asked breathlessly. What's up? Liam grinned. I came to see my favorite wife. I see you're greeting me in full dress. How did you find me? Well, I told you I'd do it no matter how you hid, and I'm never one to throw words around. What do you want from me now? You took everything away from me. After I got out of prison, I had to sell everything to pay off the debts my last partner left me in the graveyard of my business. After that, I had to live in a stinking gatehouse and sweep the damn yards every morning, all just to find you. I wanted to file a missing persons report on you at first, but they turned me down. So I figured out a way to get those stupid cops to come after you. Then it was just a matter of doing the little things. Although I had to use my acting talent, the stubborn policeman didn't want to give me your details. But now, as you can see, I'm here with you. Liam, what do you want? We're not husband and wife for a long time. Lucinda tried to speak as calmly as possible. The woman was stalling for time because Steve should be here any minute. Lucinda hoped that he would be able to fix the problem. It's okay, we'll get remarried. You've left me with nowhere else to live and no one will hire me, so I'm staying here on your full support. I've fed you, clothed you, taken you to resorts. Now it's your turn. What are you talking about? I have a fiancé and he'll be here soon. Oh, you scared me, Liam said with a sneer. If he tries to come in here, I'll break every bone in his body. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Lucinda wanted to go to the door and open it, but Liam wouldn't let her. Don't you dare. I'm tired right now and I don't want to talk to anyone. Let her go. But the doorbell kept ringing. At the same time, Lucinda's cell phone rang. Answer it and tell her you're not going anywhere. And if you fart, I'll kill you where you stand. I've got nothing to lose. Do you understand? Lucinda nodded and hit the answer button. Steve, I'm sorry. I'm not feeling very well. I got a headache and I fell asleep. Look, can we postpone our trip to the theater? I'm really not feeling very well right now. Lucinda, I've been standing on your doorstep for about 10 minutes. Why don't you let me in? Steve, I'm sorry. I look terrible and I don't want you to see me like this. Why don't we meet tomorrow? Is there anything you need? Medication? No, thanks. I love you. Love you too. I'll call you tomorrow morning. Steve disconnected the call and went to the elevator. Liam watched through the peephole. Good for you. You did the right thing. Now let's go to the kitchen. I'm hungry. Lucinda obediently led her ex-husband to the table and began to warm his dinner. Liam smugly watched the woman. After a while, she put a plate of pasta and a glass of tomato juice in front of him. Don't you have anything to drink? No, Lucinda answered briefly. That's too bad. All right, sit down and eat too. I'm sick of eating alone. I don't want to, the woman tried to object. Eat, I said, Liam shouted and pounded his fist on the table. Lucinda flinched in surprise and obediently placed the same plate in front of her. After dinner, Liam said he wanted to go to bed. Lucinda tried to linger in the kitchen to do the dishes, but the man wouldn't let her do so and told her to go with him to his room. Lucinda made the bed and Liam unceremoniously laid down on it. Lie down, he commanded Lucinda. Could I at least take a shower? She asked timidly. That's the last thing I need. You're going to run away from me and I'm too tired to keep you there. But after a short pause, Liam added, Go though. Only take your clothes off here. Why? Lucinda asked in horror. I want to see if you've gained any fat. Liam laughed. I want a slim wife. What are you talking about? Lucinda's eyes started to water. Don't cry, you idiot. It's like nothing ever happened between us. You know, I haven't even cheated on you once in all these years. You're the last one I had sex with. So you can imagine how hungry I am for a woman's warmth. Lucinda was already sobbing at the top of her voice. She was scared and disgusted at the same time. And most importantly, she didn't know how to find a way out of this situation. Shut up. Liam jumped up to Lucinda and slapped her painfully on the cheek. The woman immediately shut up and looked at him with eyes full of hatred. Get undressed, Liam repeated his order in a commanding voice. Lucinda began to slowly remove her clothes and Liam just watched this spectacle from the side. After 5 minutes, Lucinda was standing in front of him completely naked. The man slowly approached her, ran his hands over her breasts and thighs. Then he kissed her greedily. Please, can I take a shower? Lucinda moaned pitifully. You have 3 minutes, Liam shouted, and don't do anything stupid. The man went back to bed and Lucinda ran to the bathroom, quietly opening the locks on the front door on the way. She herself didn't know how that would help her in this situation, but the woman hoped for a miracle. Lucinda stepped into the bathroom and closed the door on the latch. Time was not on her side. What to do now and how to get out of this situation, she had no idea. Words couldn't get through to Liam, at least not now. He hadn't wanted to listen to Lucinda before, even when they were still married, and now that the man thought she was to blame for all his problems, he wouldn't talk to her. Needing to run was the only way out. Quickly wrapping a towel around herself, Lucinda cautiously opened the door. It was dark and Liam was nowhere to be seen. The woman tiptoed through the door and headed for the exit. Suddenly, she heard her ex-husband's mocking voice. "Are you going far?" Lucinda was stunned with horror. She realized that this was the end. She would not have a chance to escape again. "Liam, listen," Lucinda began to say, trying to appeal to her ex-husband's reason. "Don't do this, I beg you. This isn't who you are. Maybe I wasn't before you put me in jail, but I am now. Liam, it's not my fault you're in prison. You caused that accident. You drove drunk. I just told the police what happened. I didn't want to hurt you." "Of course you didn't. If you hadn't, you wouldn't have run away like a rat. I asked you for help. I had a lot of money and I could really get out of jail. But you wouldn't do it. You chose to run away from me and leave me alone with all this shit. You made your own choices, and now you're gonna have to pay me back. I've given you everything for years. Now you're gonna give it to me for a dime. Now enough words. Let's get back to business." Liam pulled the towel off Lucinda with a sharp movement. She tried to run, but the man grabbed her arm and squeezed her wrist painfully. "You're not going anywhere. Calm down, or it will only get worse." He dragged Lucinda into the room and pushed her onto the bed, then piled his body on top of her. "No, don't. Please let go," Lucinda screamed, but it only made Liam stronger. The man reveled in his newfound power over his ex-wife. He could see how scared she was and he loved it. "Scream. It only turns me on." Lucinda had lost all hope and was running out of strength. She could no longer resist her ex-husband. The woman closed her eyes, resigned to her fate. Suddenly there was a thud, and Liam collapsed on top of Lucinda. It was hard to breathe for a few seconds, but someone moved her ex-husband off her and gently ran his hand over her cheek. "Lucinda, it's all right." Lucinda heard Steve's voice. "Steve, how? How did you get in here? We have to call the police right now." "Lucinda, calm down. I've already done it. You get dressed, and I'll disarm this guy before he comes to his senses." Lucinda quickly jumped out of bed and threw on the first robe she could find. 5 minutes later, the police arrived. They made a report of what had happened and took Liam to the station. Lucinda was still reeling from the nightmare she had been through. She and Steve were sitting in the kitchen, and he placed a glass of alcohol in front of Lucinda. "Drink this, it will help you calm down and relax." Lucinda obediently did so. The tension really began to subside, and she was able to regain some of her composure. "Steve, how did you know I needed help?" Lucinda asked. "I don't know. I felt it. At first I thought you were really sick and fast asleep, so you didn't hear my calls. I got out of the driveway, got in my car, and drove home. But something kept bugging me. I mean, in all the time I've known you, you've never done that. You've had health problems, but you've always been happy to see me. And now you wouldn't even open the door, even though we talked this afternoon and everything was fine. And then I remembered your story about being called to the police on some case involving your ex-husband. I put 2 and 2 together and I had an unpleasant hunch. I didn't want to believe that anything bad could happen to you, but I decided to see if it was true, so I quickly got into my car and drove back to your place. I was about to press the bell, but suddenly I heard you screaming from behind the door. I quickly called the police, thinking about how I could stall until they arrived. Then I jerked the doorknob, and by some miracle it opened. I grabbed the first thing that came to hand and ran toward the sounds. And then you know the rest. Lucinda was again struck by a wave of horror at the realization of what could have happened to her and how Steve had miraculously been there at the very last moment. The man came close to her, hugged her tightly, yet gently, and said softly, "I'll never leave you alone now. Too many things happened to you when I wasn't around. Perhaps now is not the right time, but still, Lucinda, do you want to be my wife?" Lucinda looked up at Steve with eyes full of tears. She had really gone through too much turmoil lately with her past life. Now she wanted a simple woman's happiness. "I do," Lucinda whispered back. The very next day, Steve took Lucinda to his house. There was no telling who else would want to infringe on her in light of recent events. A short time later, they were married. It was a simple wedding without any frills. The newlyweds did not organize a celebration, just a quiet dinner with their family. Now it seemed to Lucinda that here it was, a real happy family life, and for this, it was not necessary to have golden mountains. As for Liam, he was being prosecuted for attempted rape. There was plenty of evidence, plus the testimony of Steve and neighbors who heard the screams, as well as characteristic marks on Lucinda's body. However, after a forensic psychiatric examination, it was found that the man had certain deviations. According to the court decision, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital for compulsory treatment, where he is likely to remain, if not for life, then for a very long period of time.